Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the next episode of the Islamic Book Review Podcast. Today we have a special topic with a very special guest. We have with us Shaykh Mohammad Yasir al-Hanafi all the way from Aylesbury, and he's going to be joining us to discuss this topic of Tafwid. But before we get into that, I want to just bring in a disclaimer. And we want to mention that this podcast and this discussion about Aqidah and Tafwid, etc., is not one that is polemic. It's an academic discussion, and it's not meant to incite sectarian feelings and hatred between the Muslims, but rather it's an educative piece to help understand the different positions of the scholars of this ummah and the positions of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah with regards to particular topics and what we believe about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, I want to bring in Mawlana Zeeshan, and I want him to kind of set the stage for us. What books are we going to be discussing today, Mawlana, and why?
Right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ahmadu wa salli wa nusallim ala rasulihi al-kareem. Amma ba'd. I hope everyone's doing well. And alhamdulillah, we've got a guest today for the first time on our podcast. We've got Mohammad Yasir al-Hanafi. And we will be discussing... this has been an ongoing discussion between me and Mohammad Yasir for over a year now, exactly how to kind of approach this topic, what books to do. So what we kind of decided eventually on, because initially we were going to look at to do this book, which is called Al-Qawl al-Tamam bi Ithbat al-Tafwid by Shaykh Saif al-Asri. And then as we were discussing this, the new book of Shaykh Sharif Hatim al-Auni came out. And this book of Shaykh Hatim also kind of delves quite specifically into the topic of what we're going to define soon, inshallah, the topic of Tafwid, or to make it easier for the audience, what is known as the Asma wa Sifat debate, the names and attributes of Allah Ta'ala, and how do we as Sunni Muslims understand these names and attributes, and the internal differences between the Muslims when it comes to this topic. So Shaykh Sharif Hatim al-Auni, who's a scholar that we have reviewed his works before in the past. We've mentioned a number of his books in the past as well. So he's written a book very recently on this. And so we thought, let's make that as our central focus of a review. And then for fairness, we'll also look at a book which defends the opposing position. And this is a book called Maqalat al-Tafwid Bayn al-Salaf Mutakallimin. I read this book a while back. Mohammad Yasir, alhamdulillah, has done a fresh reading of it. So he will have a lot of comments to say about that as well. And so we're going to basically try to delve into this topic. But as you mentioned to begin with, this notion of sectarianism. So what I want to do is I want to get Mohammad Yasir in to say a few comments about what the idea behind this podcast is and share some of his thoughts, and then we can start from there, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khairan. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa al-aqibatu lil-muttaqeen wa as-salatu wa as-salamu ala rasulih an-nabiy al-ummi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakumullah khairan, Mawlana Mohammed and Shaykh Zeeshan, for having me on this podcast. The objective of today's podcast, I would say, are two main reasons. First and foremost, to have a good idea of this very controversial topic, historically speaking. This topic that we are discussing today has remained a controversy within the Ummah for over 1,000 years. And it has divided the Ummah in many aspects. And now we are seeing this division on social media amongst Muslims because of this topic. So the first objective is to understand this topic. And the second objective, from my perspective, is to be able to discuss this controversial topic, but in an academic way and with the objective of tafahum, mutual understanding. Unfortunately, and I'm also, I would say, guilty of this, I have discussed this topic many times before, but the approach has been quite polemical, has been quite provocative, and at times, because polemics is such thing that you start patronizing, condescending. And what we tend to forget is the most important thing in this is the honor of the Muslim. To preserve and protect the honor of Muslim is far more important than having these discussions in this way. So hopefully today, inshallah, with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm hoping that Mawlana Zeeshan and myself and Mawlana Mohammed, we are able to explicate this intricate topic in an academic way, but at the same time simple so the public can understand, and also do this academically, and we have respect for the interlocutors or our opponents in this issue. And one final point I want to mention is that we need to have more of this. It's very difficult to say, let's not discuss this, because it has been discussed for many years. It's out there in the public on social media. What we need to do is, and I'm probably pushing my limits here, we need to probably have somebody on this podcast from the other side also that can discuss this with us. And this is quite natural, even if you look at the development of the Ash'ari and Maturidiyya, the schools. Initially, because they didn't have mutual discussions, there was quite harsh feelings and sentiments from one side, mainly the Maturidiyya side. If you look at, for example, Imam Abu Mu'in Nasafi's Tabsiratul Adillah, the early Maturidiyya, some of the remarks regarding the Ash'ari would suggest that they were not part of Ahlul Sunnah. So from a human perspective, when you don't have discussions, you don't understand one another.
We can actually go further back than that. Right? So when we look at the position of Imam Abu Hanifa amongst the Muhaddithun, the Hadith scholars, the Ahlul Hadith, get to a stage where the common position amongst them is a negative view about Imam Abu Hanifa.
Yes.
So Imam Abu Hanifa's view regarding Iman, if you were to read how some of these early Hadith scholars, Imams, we're not talking about fringe scholars, we're talking about Imams, the way they refer to Imam Abu Hanifa in a very derogative way. But now that same discussion of Iman amongst the later scholars of Hadith, Ibn Abdul Barr, al-Dhahabi, Ibn Taymiyyah, all these scholars that we consider from the Ahlul Hadith, their view regarding Imam Hanifa is one of a positive one. And they say the difference is a semantical difference when it comes to Iman. But it shows you, as you said, it's a lack of conversations that are taking place where you're not directly engaging with your mukhalif, with your opponent. So when you direct with your mukhalif, the idea isn't that once I engage with you, we're going to have a semantical difference, it's going to go fine. But at least we can actually get to what the core aspect of the debate is. So the way I'll try to kind of view this is that, because it's always good to find analogies in our personal disputes. So when you have two people that are disputing and they get together and they're fighting over something and you're trying to say, okay, what's the issue? And so everyone's going to start to name things. They'll say, oh, it's because they looked at me this way, it's because they did this. And then once you start to, go into it, you actually find out that a lot of these debates are secondary. The actual issue is maybe they owe you money. The actual issue is because they said something negative about you in the past. And you say, all right, so now we've got, which is what we like to call in Arabic is mahallu niza'. That what's the actual place of dispute?
Exactly.
And how significant is that place of dispute? That's what we need to try to get to. So when when the Muhaddithun were criticizing Imam Abu Hanifa, the Hanafis, from actually one of the authentic transmissions of a letter of Imam Abu Hanifa is his Risal to Uthman al-Batti. It's actually one of the few things that actually preserved from Imam Abu Hanifa in terms of his own writing. And that's about the topic of Iman. So he explains it, his students explain it, but you don't see any citations of this letter of Uthman al-Batti from the Muhaddithun.
Yes.
Which shows that there was very little engagement with the actual thought of Imam Abu Hanifa. It was the character of Imam Abu Hanifa, which they had seen through maybe their Mu'tazila opponents.
Or they'd heard about from just people passing on information.
Etc. Yeah, so that's what they were basing it upon. And it became like a consensus amongst the many of the hadith scholars of 1 century. It actually becomes a consensus that this is like the agreed upon position that no, you don't. Like, if you were sitting amongst them and Imam Hanifa's name came up, you'd be like, of course it's deviant. It was one of those as a given, all right? But then how time goes and you have more engagement, you get to a far better understanding. So it doesn't mean the end result is that we're going to agree, but the end result is that we actually know what we dispute about.
Yes.
And that's where the issue, I think, a lot of it comes down to.
Yes, so, and even if you look at let me finish the point regarding the Maturidiyya. So for many centuries, the Maturidiyya were having this understanding that the Ash'ari, they are either not true representatives of Ahlul Sunnah or they're not part of Ahlul Sunnah. It was only until Imam Fakhruddin Razi rahmatullah alayhi, who passed away in 606 Hijri, when he went to Ma Wara al-Nahar, Samarkand and Bukhara, and he had these debates with the Maturidi scholars, and then his treatise Al-Munadhara ma'a ulama Ma Wara al-Nahar, something like this, published now, where he had debates with those scholars, and then they realized, wait a minute, there are differences, but it's not as bad. And the final point is that the method of the Quran, even if you believe your interlocutor to be on complete batil, the way your discussion should be is one of objectivity and also based on evidence and barahin, not emotional driven. So, for example, in the Quran, Allah says, وَإِنَّا, the Prophet said to the people, وَإِنَّا أَوْ إِيَّاكُمْ لَعَلَى هُدًى أَوْ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. وَإِنَّا أَوْ إِيَّاكُمْ لَعَلَى هُدًى أَوْ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. Either us or you, we are on guidance or misguidance. Of course, the Anbiya alayhim salatu wassalam are on clear guidance. There's no doubt about this. But they want the people to see themselves, reason that, look, this is not about, there's nothing personal here. We want you to use your own reason and sagacity and aql to come to the same conclusion that we have come to. So this is one of the objectives of these academic discussions, that we don't want to have, I know it's difficult maybe as an Ash'ari to say this, but we don't want to have confirmation biases and cognitive biases from before, and we're attacking our opponent that we are right, you are wrong, khalas. No, let's discuss this in a manner, let's present the evidence and let's look at this together. And where we differ, like Mawlana Zeeshan said, the mahallun niza, where do we exactly differ on? Let's talk there. Instead of all these other ad hominems, attacks, and all of these other things that are irrelevant to the discussion.
So over here, there's an interesting binary that you kind of normally get, is that you either, when you're talking about sectarianism is either that you're refusing to discuss topics that are controversial.
Yeah.
So anytime someone discusses something controversial, he said, oh, you're igniting sectarianism.
Yes.
And then, because in our minds, sectarianism is the pure discussion of controversial topics.
Yeah.
But sectarianism is something more than that, because the problem we have is, there's twofold. Number one is that we should be discussing controversial topics, but it's about placing every topic in its rightful place.
Yes.
So in terms of right now, if we see the issue of Palestine, then our discourse would say, okay, how do we discuss Palestine? Can't be the same way we're discussing secondary issues of theology, right? If the tone is the same, so if the way I am attacking a Zionist is the same tone I'm using with fellow Muslims about a secondary issue of theology, then you've come into sectarianism. Because you clearly don't understand what you're talking about, right? So the idea is, but then if you go to the other extreme, which would normally be, which is not an extreme, but it's an approach some scholars take, which is that, look, I'm not interested in controversial topics. I'm here to just teach the basis of Islam, what I think is true, and those kind of things I'm not interested in. And that's fine, that's a viable option. But as you said, once the cat's out of the bag is the fact that the discussion is taking place.
Yes.
So what happens then is that if people that are engage the topic, what we are calling academically. What does academically mean? Meaning those are actually going back to the primary sources or to the books and the research being produced, and then analyzing and providing to the best of their ability an objective conclusion. If those folks are not participating in that discussion, then you're going to leave the discussion to people that are there for other agendas or who are not qualified. And so so it's not ideal that we discuss an intricate aspect of secondary theology that we are on a public podcast. But the situation is that where else is a person going to get these discussions? Because they're going to be exposed to that.
Yes.
And what I saw more recently, and you're more aware of this, is that even now when it comes to public discourse against Christians and Jews and atheists, they bring up the discussion of Asma wa Sifat amongst the Sunni Khilaf, the Khilaf amongst Ahl Sunnah.
Because they know they can use that against us.
So we have to have someone that engages with that, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So this is why the two is not mutually exclusive, that, okay, once you're anti-sectarian, then you're not allowed to discuss these topics. To the contrary, if you can discuss this topic. Now, we did this podcast about a year and a half ago, or 2 years now, it's been about Wahhabism. And we spoke about Wahhabism. Not once did we say something like any sab or shatam, like in terms of swearing or any vile language, etc. But at the same time, we were very critical of the ideology behind Wahhabism. But they were also recognizing a spectrum amongst Wahhabis. So not everyone is necessarily on board with what we are advocate or saying that the original followers of Muhammad Wahhab were on. So it's about recognizing that distinction. So when we're saying academic, everyone uses the word academic.
Yes.
These are because when no one's going to turn up and say, right, my discussion is going to be unacademic, right? Everyone's going to say, no, it's academic. So then how do you know? What's the distinction that you have to make? Now, it's going to be very hard for some folks to make a distinction because they don't have access to the material. If you don't have access to the material, then my advice to you is don't engage the topic. If the topic is something that requires a certain level of competency, it has a certain level of engagement with the material, and you're not able to do that, then maybe this is not the discussion for you.
Zeeshan, I'm sorry to interject. You've mentioned a very important point. I think if I can ask a question, follow-up question. So the discussion of these controversial topics is not necessarily tantamount to sectarianism. Meaning, having these discussions does not mean that you are involved in sectarianism. You mentioned one point in there. A feature of sectarianism is where you discuss, for example, important issues like Gaza in the same fashion or passion as a subsidiary theological issue. Is there any other features you can mention of sectarian? Like how would our audience today know that this discussion that we are having, although it is controversial, highly controversial, I would say, historically speaking, however, is within the academic sphere and it's not sectarianism? So the way we discuss it, this is the one thing you mentioned. Is there anything else that you can say? Because this is very important. Because when for example, if I put this on my Twitter, like I put a few weeks ago an academic review of Shaykh Hatim al-Awani's book, and I was getting blasted. You are sectarian. You're calling for the unity of the ummah, but at the same time you're discussing these topics. So it's very important to understand that discussing these topics is not sectarianism. It's like, in actual fact, we're trying to get people closer to each other. But if you could add on this, maybe some more features of what makes a person sectarian.
So there's a number. There's various elements that are involved. So one, I would say, starts off with the individual. So it's more of a personal question. So some things we can't observe. So right now, we are all sitting here calmly speaking about it, but who knows what my intention is?
Yes.
My intention could be to do so. There has to be, any conversation, discussion starts with what's your mindset? What's your purpose behind this discourse? So there has to, so you have to start off with any discussions like this. As an academic, we're talking about, right? So if you're as a researcher, there's two different types of people you're talking about. One is as a researcher, is that you need to approach the topic. So as your listener saying, am I approaching the topic for the sake of Allah? In the sense that, is the goal to get to truth? Or
so
is
intention,
the goal?
ikhlas.
Ikhlas is where you have to start off with. And that's a personal thing, so we can't, but you have to start off with that.
Yes.
Right? So, but if you see that you're already clouded, right, that, okay, I want this guy to be wrong. So if you're listening and saying, I want to see where he gets it wrong, straight away your sincerity is clouded. So again, I would say, pause it. Stop the discussion. Put that to a side. Do something else for a while, right? And then come back to it. So that's on a personal scale. And so that's what we hope that we've done. But in terms of markers that you look up, if a person, and again, it's very hard if you're not competent in the field, because a person can use good language and still dupe you into it. But if you notice in the speaker, because most discussions which are controversial historically is usually not going to be that straightforward. And if someone presents something super straightforward to something which our imams are disagreeing on, that should be a alarm bell should start ringing that this guy's not telling you something. Right?
There's more to this.
There has to be more to it. So if I'm saying Imam Shafi'i, let's say like a fiqh issue that everyone agrees. So Imam Shafi'i says this, Imam Abu Hanifa says this, and I present the discussion in 30 seconds that clearly shows Imam Abu Hanifa was right. There's this hadith is sahih, that hadith is fabricated, there it's done. The listener should say, well, isn't this Imam Shafi'i meant to be this great Imam? So how did he get it so wrong so simply? So then I am most likely deceiving you. But when you notice someone is being fair to their opponent,
yes,
and actually taking their argument seriously, because remember, we're not talking about groups that are way off. Like, we're having like, a very, strange and, a false belief. They're talking about imams that we all respect. So when we're having our Salafi discussion, so many of the views that we look at and we say these are incorrect views held by contemporary Salafis, you can find precedent of them from imams that were celebrated.
Exactly.
Right? So whether you like it or not, there are imams that are celebrated that we respect as having intelligence. We respect as producing content, held some form of this kind of views.
Yes.
So when someone is kind of coming there within 30 seconds, just absolutely annihilating, there's no pushback from the other side, the listener should think, okay, this person is not telling me the full story. And likewise, when it comes to, and more so from the Salafi side, right? Because why? Because as you will see that historically, the current Salafi approach to Asma wa Sifat has been a minority stance. right? I will come to this, explain this in more detail later, inshallah, but it's been the minority stance. If a Salafi comes and says, these guys are deviant and they present views that are so wayward, but then you hear about, are we not supposed about Ibn Hajar was an Imam, Nawawi was an Imam, Bayhaqi was an Imam? How are they so dumb now, to just fall for such a, that should, now they could be, rationally speaking, they could have done it, right? But if we're saying they're so grey, and then they're so wrong so quickly, and we can so easily understand it, there should be some pause to say, let me think about this, or there may be more to it. So again, if you're not able to then go and look it up, this discussion is not for you. You park that. Like there could be something that is agreed upon batil. So let's say Shi'ism, right? The views of Ithna Ashari Shi'ism is agreed upon batil amongst all of us. But it's not for everyone to go participate in that debate. Because there's going to be elements that are to do with tariq, about history, about authenticity of certain hadith, exegesis of certain verses of the Quran, that is beyond your pay grade.
Yes.
So if you're not getting it, a Shi'i is come talking about mut'ah, and you're like, I don't really understand what's going on. You don't have to engage in that discussion. That's not part of your iman to engage. Let someone else do it. You park it. If someone, your Salafi Shaykh has been attacking Ash'aris, but you don't understand it, someone asks you, say, all right, go talk to the Shaykh.
Exactly.
Right? Likewise, when I'm telling students certain views, I would never say to them, now you need to go and give da'wah to this view. If it's my view and you're not fully comprehensive or comprehensive, you're just taking it based on my authority, any discussion you have, you say, come and talk to me because I'm the one teaching you.
Yes.
But when you start seeing people that are taking these kind of conversations, simplifying it, and then expecting the public to go and advocate it, again, alarm bells should start ringing that there's something going on here. So it's not a clear science to know exactly what's sectarian and what isn't. Yeah. But these are just certain features to keep an eye out for.
They're very good markers.
Yeah, I think that's all you can have, markers.
These can be used as somewhat criteria for the general public.
Exactly. And for students of knowledge, it's a bit better, easier. Students of knowledge is that anytime someone says something, right, go to the primary source. Yeah. It's very easy. All of these books that we're using today, or most of the books, they're either already available in soft copies, or you can easily get access to them by asking around.
Yes.
So if I'm quoting you things, just go check it out.
Yeah, check
if it's a book, go check it out. If you start to see a pattern that this person, whatever they're quoting, is accurate, there's a sign that this person's fair, at least. Then you can look at the interpretation of the passages as a secondary discussion. If you start seeing that this guy is consistently quoting stuff, when you go actually look at the passage, they actually talk about something different, right? That's a clear marker that this person is not honest, right? And so dishonesty, even without the intent of sectarianism, meaning if you're, so let me rephrase that. If you're not academically rigorous, even sincere, you're still stoking the flame of sectarianism.
Yeah.
So I am sincere, but I'm not being academically rigor.
Yeah.
So I do want to critique Salafism.
So would that be unintentional sectarianism?
Unintentional, because I'm fully sincere.
Yes.
Right? But I haven't done the homework.
Yes.
And I'm advocating things. So you may do a lie detector and I'll be like, I'm fully sincere on this. Yeah. But because I've not done the homework, I'm not, given in the hours, then you're still part of the problem.
So with sincerity is also the hard work.
100%, yes. It doesn't have to be nefarious agendas.
Yes.
And I give you one other example, right? So just to kind of, it's always good to give real examples. When we approach a topic and you're let's say you're starting off either as a layperson or you're a student of knowledge, and let's say you come across a figure. So let's not talk about Ibn Taymiyyah, let's talk about someone a bit more closer to home. So you have someone like Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, right? Now, Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, on one side, we've got Shaykh Akbar, right? So the greatest Shaykh, and the other side we've got Kafir.
Yes.
Right? Can't get any more extreme in terms of the
Those
spectrum,
are the two
right?
options.
That's the two options, right? And those positions have been held by great Imams, right? So the position of takfir was not just the position of Ibn Taymiyyah, no. Imam Sakhawi.
Ibn Hajar, I think, too, also.
Imam Sakhawi's got a whole book on this. Al-Qawl al-Mabni, I think it's called, right? It's a large work where he lists all those positions, and there's various scholars. And even amongst many mutakallimun today, right, they have a very negative view to Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. Sheikh Sa'id Food has got books on Ibn Arabi, right? On the other side, you got Imam Sha'rani. You got the Deoband school. Mawlana Shaytanwi wrote a whole defense of it, right? Shaykh al-Akbar is considered as the default position amongst the Deobandi ulama. That's just one, meaning the Akbarians are far more larger schools in the Ottoman period, etc. as well. So now you come across this, your position should not start with takfir. If you're starting with takfir, saying, I'm going to go, on what basis?
Exactly.
Right? Your position would start with saying, at the bare minimum, tawaqquf, that I suspend judgment, or husn al-dhan, and say he was a great scholar. And then as you study, you can either further reinforce that or you may shift to the other side.
Yes.
And so once we agree on that, then when we talk about someone like Ibn Taymiyyah, the same. If you've got authorities that have been praising him and authorities that have been criticizing him, of course, one is objectively going to be true. But at the current moment, I'm going to start with the position of either tawaqquf or husnul dhan, because imams that we agree on has praised him.
Because you don't have research,
And but the fact that if you're starting off the discussion with takfir or tabdi' of great imams, and you don't really know how, then that means that your whole approach, even though it may be sincere, has been based upon sectarian lines and also based upon ignorance. So forget the term sectarian. That wouldn't even be allowed as a believer. Right? That I have to, that's the idea of the Khawarij. One of the views of the Khawarij that it was attributed to them, that they start with takfir and you have to prove your iman. Right? So if you're going to start with that okay, you're a deviant, now prove why you're not.
Guilty until proven innocent.
The opposite, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you're doing that, but you say, yeah, but this sheikh said he's deviant. Yeah, but that sheikh is not. So when you're starting off a discussion, you should not be coming in all guns blazing when people within your tradition disagree. So you start off with either suspend judgment, start with husnul dhan, and then as you maneuver through it, you may conclude at the end that these guys are very deviant, or you may not. But that's how the approach that a person has to take.
And if you don't have the energy to do that journey,
then don't do it.
To say, I'm not going to get
That's it. And many scholars have adopted that approach.
Yeah.
And so I think what would be good to move on from here is, and I want you to kind of speak about it a bit as well, inshallah. Like in Shaykh Hatim, normally we start at the beginning, but Shaykh Hatim in his book has 2 addendums. One of the addendum is an article that he published about a year ago before he published the book, which is this discussion or debate, quite harsh actually, between 2 imams of Ahl Sunnah. So both of these imams are considered agreed upon imams of Ahl Sunnah. You have Ibn Salah, right, who the whole science of hadith rotates around, and you got Izz ibn Salam, who's known as Sultan al-Ulama. That's the laqab that was given, right? I remember when I asked Shaykh Hatim many years ago, I said, Shaykh, if you could meet any Shaykh, also any of the ulama of the past, who would you meet? So he said, from the Sahaba, I would meet Umar al-Khattab. From the Tabi'un, it would be Hassan al-Basri, because Hassan al-Basri was his MA dissertation with Hassan al-Basri. And he goes, from the Imams, it will be Izz ibn Salam. Right? So that was his, because he's read a lot about him. So this is where the munaqasha, debate is taking place. And it's very interesting, it's very relevant as well. So he puts in the addendum here. I'll let Shaykh give some introduction to that, inshallah.
Yeah, so this, subhanAllah, this debate between these 2 scholars, as Shaykh Hatim al-Awni, he has mentioned this in his work, starting off from page 441. So this is a debate between these 2 scholars, as Mawlana Zeeshan said, Ibn Salah and Al-Izz ibn Abdul Salam, rahmatullahi alayhim. Now, I had this discussion with Mawlana Zeeshan about this debate. So just to give you a synopsis of the debate is basically, you have Ibn Salah, he was asked regarding a fatwa, and the issue specifically is regarding Quran, the very famous controversy of the Quran, whether the Quran is makhluq or it isn't. And you have to remember that this, historically speaking, again, a lot of ulama got shaheed because of this issue. There was a lot of bloodshed. And also some ulama like Imam Taftazani in his Sharh al-Aqaid al-Safiyya, one of the reasons, among the 8 reasons, he suggests that ilm al-kalam, the science of kalam, was called kalam, it was named kalam because of the significance of this issue. So this is a very hot topic. So Ibn Salah is asked about this topic, and he gives a very, you could say, I wouldn't say a diplomatic answer, maybe diplomatic, but he's basically said, look, this is the issue. You don't need to get into this, whether the Quran, the huruf and aswat, whether they are created, the muhdath or not, etc. Just have iman on the basic, and you don't need to get into this. This reaches now Al-Izz ibn Abdul Salam, rahmatullahi alayh. And his response is a bit more harsh, that you need to know the truth from falsehood. And his response was quite harsh. Now, Mawlana, correct me if I'm wrong. It was Ibn Salah's student who then responded to. So Ibn Salah's student then responded to Al-Izz ibn Abdul Salam that this was an unfair attack on our Shaykh. And from what I remember, Mawlana, and please correct me if I'm wrong, when he responded, Ibn Salam thought the Shaykh responded Ibn Salah, so he responded back. And so they had this back and forth.
Quite harsh.
Quite very harsh. If you see the language,
Ibn Salam also.
Yeah, Ibn Salah, isn't he? Now, me and Mawlana had this discussion, and Shaykh Hatim al-Awni, he also extracts his reflections from this back and forth debate. The first thing was, you could tell even at that time, the social environment of these polemical issues, there was this going on. And this is why you have these two scholars giving their responses. Now, Ibn Salah, from the debate, it seems like he wanted to keep peace. Yeah. Mawlana, you suggested this because he was more of into hadith.
Yes.
And he wasn't, quote unquote, your seasoned Ash'ari.
Yeah, because it's temperament as well, isn't it? Because I think many people don't like that. So, when you talk about even stuff that might be haqq, jism, arad, you talk about Allah Ta'ala that, right? There's many ulama, you've seen ulama like this, that are very much Ash'ari tradition, etc. But they're like, look, I don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
This all falsafa, these words, etc. Look, Allah said it, Quran, ghair makhluq, we stop at that, right? So it's a temperament thing. It's not he's holding a position that it is or isn't.
Yeah.
It's more the fact that let's practice sukut, and whatever Allah intended by it, that's what it is.
Yes.
That's the temperament that he's kind of pushing.
Yeah.
And that's his temperament. And that's because, and it usually comes from those who are usually more hadith inclined.
Yes.
Because they're so engaged with prophetic words. They're like, we don't need all of this stuff. And I think that's the kind of perspective that he's kind of pushing. Whereas Ibn Salam, you said, he's much more from the rational sciences.
Yes.
So he can't get his head wrapped around of, well, we clearly know that's wrong.
Yeah.
And you probably experience ulama like this, like you know it's wrong. Yeah. So why not say it's wrong?
And it's ghira for Allah.
Exactly.
These things matter. We can't. And Ibn Islam, he mentions this, that, okay, the Salaf, because this is one of the responses, the Salaf and the Sahaba did not engage in this. But he says they did not need to engage because this fitna was not there. Yeah.
What's interesting is that Imam Ibn Salah's student is the one who responded. It's like a bit of a Jamja presence in that time as well.
Reading from Mawlana, I don't know if you agree with this, reading from the debate, it seemed like the harshness from, obviously, mainly from Ibn Salam's side, it could have been influenced by the students or what was said to him.
Potentially, but if there's another debate which is more famous between these folks, that's the debate of Salatul Raghaib. Salatul Raghaib is a prayer that used to be
between both of the scholars.
For these both scholars,
okay.
It was a prayer that.
So they had a past.
They had a past, yeah. They had a past. This past actually it usually comes up in the bid'ah debate. So what's the definition of bid'ah?
Okay.
The Salatul Raghaib was a specific prayer that used to be prayed after Maghrib on, I think, Rajab, right? And so Ibn Salah was asked regarding it. Ibn Salah goes, look, when you take an act like Salatul Raghaib, and it has no evidence in the Quran. So there was a fabricated hadith that was being utilized, but he goes, individually, the Salatul Raghaib is the Salah after Maghrib, you can pray Nawafil after Maghrib. Up here to recite Surah Ikhlas a number of times, fixed number of times, because you can repeat. So he goes, individuals all fine, the acts in the Sharia. So if you kind of culminate together in one practice, then what's the problem? Ibn Salam was like, no, that's such a clear bid'ah. How could you say such a thing? And then he comes back again very harsh against Ibn Salah, and eventually the winner of that in terms of Abu Shah al-Maqdisi, those scholars come after, is Ibn Salam. So Ibn Salah's position is seen as like fringe view that permitted Salatul Raghaib, most didn't. So I think Shaykh Hatim alludes to that as well, that there is some past between them.
Yeah.
Now, whether that comes down to just academic, right, or is it the fact that you have contemporaries? And with contemporaries, there's always that taking place, and some people find that very odd. If you're not aware of the tradition, or you're not in the inner workings of the Maulvi circles, right, you may find that quite strange, because isn't it all for the sake of Allah? But the nature of scholarship or this kind of arena, human nature as well, there's competition, and these kind of things do spill over more often than not.
Shaykh Zeeshan, one lesson I take from this debate is the impact that it can have on the public.
Yeah.
So in the era of these two scholars, they were writing directly to one another, or the students were involved. At least the students were involved. This is very clear. Now, if one scholar writes a book, the other scholars, students, or followers will read. So it does have an impact. So there was always an impact on the public to some extent. But now in social media era, that impact is magnified by 10-folds, 20-folds, Allah knows best. So one of the things I'm having, I think, Shaykh al-Izz ibn Islam, he's a big scholar. He must have his reasons. But from what I'm just trying to understand why Ibn Salah gave this diplomatic, so to speak, response. He probably had the general public in mind, or the students who were not theologically equipped to this level of contingencies and a'rad and all of these other arguments of the mutakallimun. So he said, look, let's just keep the peace. And this is very important. I think Shaykh Hatim, he's somewhat inclined towards this, that the scholars who are discussing these topics, they need to be careful how they discuss them and what kind of impact is it having on the wider public. Because the wider public cannot differentiate between the intricacies of these topics, and they end up giving general judgments, or they end up even bad-mouthing the other side, for example, scholar the other side.
They'll hang on every word of whoever's saying the point that they're saying. And if, for example, a scholar uses any sort of language to impugn the other side, that will be taken as gospel.
Exactly.
Not unintended, right? Exactly. And so, for example, then they'll say, Imam Hajar, Dal Mudil, Nawawi, Dal Mudil, Na'udhu Billah. Because some scholar in the past said, is mukhti in Asma' al-Sifat, so it's not from Ahlul Sunnah in this one, however.
So I think we have a huge responsibility, and this responsibility has increased with the social media, that the way we discuss these topics, we need to be very scrupulous and careful how we discuss them. Because we might be saying it in a very academic way, but the public might, like you mentioned, they might just catch one or two phrases of that, and it will just exacerbate the division amongst Ummah.
The irony is that that's one of the accusations against Shaykh Hatim's tone as well. The fact that he's talking about even his tone is being then... We'll come back to the critique.
I think we'll come back to that. It was very interesting.
But it's an interesting point there anyway. So now, that's a few things that I'm highlighting. So just to do a brief...
Take my top off, it's getting quite warm in here.
Just to give a bit of background to the books. So before we go to Shaykh Hatim, this was a book that we wanted to do. Mawlana's got 2 editions of it, so we've got 3 copies there, right?
MashaAllah.
This is the book called Al-Qawl al-Tamam bi-Ithbat al-Tafwid Madhhab li-Salaf al-Kiram by Shaykh Saif ibn Ali al-Asri. Now, on this topic of Asma' Sifat, there's numerous books, right? There's so many works. Forget the online articles, in terms of just books, right? But one of the things you will notice with a lot of the books is they're quite repetitive, right? I would say more so with the works by the Salafi scholars, so those who adhere to the thought of Ibn Taymiyyah, that most of the Salafi discourse on Asma wa Sifat. Because remember, what we're dealing with in terms of Salafism, what do we mean by that? Just to kind of get some common terminology that everyone can be agreed upon, is that you have amongst the early Muslims a faction that is known as atheism, right? So atheism, which is the idea that whatever the text says, you stick to that, you don't try to engage any discourse beyond that. So anything that is beyond that, you try, or if you do engage with it, to a minimum as possible. It's not really a school of thought, right? It's more of the absence of a school of thought, meaning we're not going to engage beyond what the text says. And that's why amongst the ulama of the Salaf, you have various levels of engagement. So one person may engage a bit more, one person doesn't, one gets angry at someone else. So you have that. What Salafism in essence is the view regarding the Athari school through the lens of Ibn Taymiyyah, right? So that's why, although I'm not using the term here, but when you say Taymi is not in a negative sense. There's even a Salafi scholar by the name of Sheikh Mashur Hassan Salman. He says they're the Taymi school, because it's a descriptive school, because we do recognize that there are various interpretations of Atharism. One of that interpretation is Ibn Taymiyyah's. Another interpretation of Atharism, which people don't mention, is Ash'ariism. Right? Ash'ariism is not deemed itself ever to be distinct from Atharism. Ash'ariism was the idea. Ash'ariism was that we're Atharis, but we're going to defend Atharism using Ilm al-Kalam. So we're part of the same camp here. We're the defenders here, if that makes sense, right? So even Ash'ariism is not a distinct school to Atharism. It never viewed itself as such, but it was a interpretation of Atharism as Ibn Taymiyyah. Now, you can then discuss, we would say Ash'ariism is the correct interpretation of Atharism, and there was Ibn Taymiyyah, or Taymiism is the correct interpretation of Atharism. But in Salafi discourse, Ibn Taymiyyah is the Imam. Right? There's not many other people that pop up. So if you look at the book that Shaykh will discuss, and you agree with this, right? The Maqal al-Tafwid, which is a large defense of the Salafi view, it's just hefty quotes of Ibn Taymiyyah after Ibn Taymiyyah, correct? Right?
Yes, correct.
And that's
because Imam Ibn Taymiyyah extensively wrote and engaged with these discussions in detail.
Yes, but you can.
Yeah, so just to add on that, Mawlana, regarding this book by Shaykh Mohammed bin Mahmud, which is actually a defense of Salafism or Atharism. The courts are overwhelmed by Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayh. In fact, he's got an entire section near the end where he defends the accusation of tajseem against Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim. He's got a full section on this, full chapter. So I had this question, why Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, why is he such a pioneering figure? If you're talking about Athari, because they say, well, Athari means we follow the pious Salaf, then surely you should have more quotes from the Salaf directly opposed to Imam Ibn Taymiyyah. So this is my reading of this book. For example, on page 37, regarding the famous objection of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, al-qawl fi ba'd al-sifat al-qawl fi ba'd al-akhar, where Imam Ibn Taymiyyah uses the objection against the Ash'ari that you guys, in one set of sifat, you accept the meaning, and in another set of sifat, the attributes of Allah, you consign the meaning, which we'll speak about later. So you are inconsistent in your approach. So the scholar, the author of this, he admits that although this principle of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah might be found in early works indirectly, but it was Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi who first explicated this principle. Unlike this, the other principles which the author himself confesses and he accepts that Imam Ibn Taymiyyah was the first one to introduce this principle, or he was the first one to explain this principle. So from this I realized that why is he such a huge figure is because there are certain principles within the Athari or the Salafi ideology which were pioneered by Imam Ibn Taymiyyah.
And only by him. So this is what we mean, in that detail. Let's be clear here, right? So there's going to be the core views that you can probably find, and many Salafis say, look, there's a early scholar Ibn Taymiyyah that shared this view, or there's a later scholar that also quoted Ibn Taymiyyah. But in terms of being the pioneer of defending and extrapolating this view, what Ibn Taymiyyah is defending, which is a much more affirmative, we'll come to what it basically means, affirmative form of accepting the sifat of Allah Ta'ala, he's the only guy. Right? So whereas when you look at the Ash'ari school, you have multiple imams. The Maturidis have multiple imams. So when you look at the Ash'ari school, you can be quoting Imam Ghazali, you can quote Fakhr al-Razi, you can quote Ahmadi, you can quote Juwaini, right? You can earlier quote the Baqilanis, and they've all got meaningful contributions. Right? Mawlana's PhD is on
Sanusi, Imam Sanusi.
Right? Imam Sanusi. That's a figure in its own, right? So you've got so many figures. So when you, with the Ash'aris, you have, and then that's looking just at the Mutakallimun, right? When you look at the commentators of Hadith, that also actually Ibn Hajar's and Nawawis and Khattabis, and we'll come to these figures as well. You can quote them. When it comes to extrapolating or defending the Taymi view of Atharism, right? There isn't many other figures. And a lot of the contemporary Salafi engagement with that has not been able to kind of match them, so therefore they just become just quoting Ibn Taymiyyah irrelevant because he's a naqil. So when you say something about Allah, can Allah be mahall al-hawadith, they say qala Ibn Taymiyyah, there'll be a long quote. There'll be very few that would actually add any additional meaningful points, right? So that most of the contemporary Salafi Aqidah school, and don't take my word for it, right? Just open up any defense of Salafi Aqidah when it comes to Asma wa Sifat, and just go, even, let's go earlier, by the way, right? What's the most famous commentary of Aqidah Tahawiyya, which is used by Salafis? Is the commentary of Izm ibn Salam. Sorry,
Ibn
Izz al-Hanafi. Sorry, wrong. Ibn Izz al-Hanafi. Wrong. So Ibn Izz al-Hanafi, his book, there's actually been studies on it, that the vast majority of that work is quotations from Ibn Qayyim. He couldn't do that, say the names because of the area he's living in, but the content of that is, so even that commentary, the bulk of the content in there is not another scholar kind of contributing to that. So Ibn Taymiyyah becomes a sole figure, and there's no one else that can match, which makes it a bit more difficult and makes it a bit more rigid, the school, because you only got one person to kind of work off. This is not the same in the Ash'arim. So anyway, but there is an element of repetition in both type of works.
But a side question, because we're talking about strands, and you mentioned the Taymi strand of the Hanbali school. So where would someone like Imam Ibn Jawzi fall into? Because he had a different kind of path. Yeah. So would he fall closer to the Ash'ari school, like you mentioned, as like a strand of? Good point.
So look, there's a I didn't get to send this to you because I read it a while back. Now I was reading it for yesterday night. It's a very nice. I'll send it to you after, inshallah. Everything will be shared on the Telegram channel, inshallah. is a work written by a scholar by the name of Abu Tayyib Mawlud As-Sariri. Sheikh, you've probably heard of this, right? Very good scholar, right? Very good. I've read some of his stuff. Very good. So he's got a 15-page discussion on Tafwid. It's called Tafwid al-Kayf la yarfa'u al-ma'na. I'll send it to you after, inshallah. Very good, worth reading. I don't want to send it yesterday night just to put you off, because it could be like last minute something new, right? But he mentioned this point. He goes, forget this discussion. He goes, forget Mu'tazilism, forget Ash'ariism, forget Salafism, forget everything. Let's look at what you're saying. And a lot of our discussions where people say, I'll give you an example, right? Because we're talking about Ibn Jawzi here. Ibn Hajar, was he an Ash'ari or not? Imam Nawawi, was he an Ash'ari or not? So all of those who defend Ash'arism will be like, of course, let's debate this. But my thing is, why? What's your contention with Ash'arism? Right? Your contention is on the Asma wa Sifat. What was Ibn Hajar's view? So whether he had officially become an Ash'ari, had a badge with Ash'ariism and walked around with it, it's irrelevant. Because the point of contention he held on to, if someone's saying, is Zayd a Shi'i or not? And you say, I don't know, let's look into it. But Zayd is saying, I believe that all the Sahaba kuffar except Ali radhiyallahu anhu, he's then you're a Shi'i. Whether you've officially become a Shi'i or not, it's irrelevant. You've got the Shi'i view. So when they talk about this Imam being Ash'ari, so he goes, forget all of this. Ibn Jawzi, when it comes to the core aspect of the Sifat of Allah Ta'ala, he shares the same view that we are saying, he shares the same view as the Ash'ari are saying. And by the way, he didn't do this at odds with the early Hanabila. He viewed it as being within the Hanbali tradition. Whether that's accurate within, that's a different discussion. But the point is that he viewed it as such. So when we're talking about strands, you have these various strands, and that's why you have to understand that Ash'arism has to be viewed as a strand of atheism, just the way Taymiism is a strand of atheism. Now, the question is, who has more right to that strand? We would contend that it's the Ash'ari school, they will contend it's the Taymi school, and that's where the whole debate and discussion takes place. So just too quickly before one comes in, right? So, so this book, why it kind of stood out, Sheikh Saif al-Asri's work, was the fact that he kind of goes into the core debate about regarding what Tafwid is. I'm going to let Mawlana explain this, right? But what Tafwid is and what Ithbat is. And then he has this very long list of scholars throughout the centuries that he believes, and many of them are very clear, that they affirm Tafwid. That's their view. So meaning they don't agree with the current Salafi view or Ibn Taymiyyah's view regarding the Sifat of Allah Ta'ala. Then once this book, because it was quite, not only that, this book had a foreword by 3 great Imams of the contemporary era. So you have Sheikh Yusuf Qardawi, Sheikh Mufti Taqi Uthmani, and Allama Sheikh Wahbi Ghawiji al-Albani. So you had 3 Imams of the contemporary era that wrote a foreword to this book. Mufti Taqi Uthmani's foreword is well worth a read. Right, it's not in some of the new editions, correct? So in
the 4th edition, he's taken out all of the forwards.
Okay, so let's take the forwards out.
Yes, there's no forwards at all.
Right.
But I've got a Pakistani edition. It's got extra forward in it. By Sheikh Sajjad al-Hijabi from Mardan, who I visited a couple of years ago. So he gave me this edition.
Okay. That's with the author's permission forward?
With the author's permission.
All right.
So this is a special Pakistani version of Al-Qawl al-Tamam.
Fair enough.
With all of the
what year is that from?
So this one,
have you got a date in the beginning?
Yeah, so it says here 2014.
Right. So I think I have. This is I think this is the first edition I have. It's 2010.
2010.
This is the one. Right.
So I have the 3rd edition. I think you have the 2nd edition, Mawlana?
Sorry, no. This is 1 minute. Let me get this right.
You must have the 2nd edition.
Second edition. Yeah.
Yeah.
The first is 2007.
I feel left out now. I didn't bring any copies.
Yeah. So this is the 3rd edition, which was printed in 2017.
Right. So this is
yeah.
But for those who, especially those who have affiliation to the Deoband, I would say, do you want to read Mufti Taqi Uthmani's view regarding this ikhtilaf?
Yeah.
Not regarding what is correct or not. He's not going to delve into that, but in terms of how to view this khilaf and how to define Ahl Sunnah, etc. Mufti Taqi Uthmani's introduction is very useful. Yeah. Inshallah, so it's well worth a read of that. And then this book, then, because it was quite unique in the terms of how it presented all these scholars together. There were responses to it.
Yes.
Right. And then the response is this book, which Imran's going to talk more about. It's Maqal al-Tafwid. And there's a few others as well, but this is probably the most largest one. And
the most detailed.
I've seen scholars like Dr. Sultan Umairi, who's a very advanced Salafi scholar and discusses these topics. He puts this as like the book to read.
Yeah.
He puts it on his list of works to read. So therefore, when we're trying to critique the opponent, we want to steel man the opponent, right? You want to say to him, like, what's your best? And then let's look at that. Not what did this random YouTuber say or this guy online, etc. Right? No, what's your book that we're doing? So sometimes people come and say, yeah, but what about my arguments? Yeah, your argument's there, but we want to go to your, what book do you write in defense? So these are some of the works. And I mentioned one article here that I'll share as well by Shaykh Mawlud al-Sariri. And then finally we get onto our book of Istiwā by Shaykh Hatim. I'll let Mawlana say a few comments about the discussion of what these definitions mean. So subjective, Tafwid, Ithbat.
I think it would be helpful for the viewers to
so
understand.
Just to give a backdrop so we understand what the discussion is. So this book by Shaykh Saif al-Asri, I'm holding the third edition here, Al-Qawlu Tamam. So the khulasa, the synopsis of this book is he argues the Ash'ari position or the Ash'ari Maturidi position regarding the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What sifat? Sifat are the attributes of Allah. So we believe Allah to be all-powerful, all-hearing, all-seeing, omniscient, omnipotent, etc. Now the scholars have categorized the sifat. They have categorized the sifat that these sifat belong to this category because of X, Y, Z, and these sifat belong to this category because of X, Y, Z. Now, without going into all of the categories, I'm just going to mention two categories so we understand today's discussion. So there's one category known as sifat aqliya or sifat ma'ani, the rational attributes or the qualitative attributes or the positive attributes. For example, qudra, power, ilm, knowledge, irada, volition, haya, life. These are attributes that the ulama say they are rational attributes. What does that mean? That means that if a person has not read the Quran and Sunnah, just based on their rationale, they have to accept a creator with these attributes, because you cannot perceive or you cannot understand an entire cosmos, an entire universe created by a causal agent that does not have power, because without power you can't create, or does not have knowledge because you can't create without having knowledge, does not have volition and irada, will, because you cannot create something which you don't intend to, or without intention, and you cannot create without life, haya. So this is one category. Now this category, the sifat aqliya, the rational or the positive attributes, the ulama say we accept the meaning, we affirm the meaning, ithbat, we affirm the meaning. So what power means, it means power, we accept for Allah. Will means will, we accept for Allah. So we have this, we accept this, we meaning the Ash'ari Maturidiyya, and I don't want to otherize the other people, but just for our discussion, we accept this, and so do our Salafi Athari brothers, they accept this. Now when it comes to the second category, the sifat al-khabariyya, the revelatory attributes, or those attributes that are based on text. For example, yadun, hand, literally means hand. Saq, literally means shin. Aynun, literally means eye. Now, what do we do when we see these sifat? Do we affirm the actual literal meaning of these attributes as we did in the first category? And why are they called revelatory attributes? Why are they called textual attributes? The reason is because the reason alone, and even based on evidence in the Quran, which we'll discuss after, you cannot understand a creator with a hand. You cannot understand or perceive a creator with a shin, literally, because that is a human corporeal entity. That is something that's created. Anything that has limbs, dimensions, corporeality, physicality, this all signifies that it is created. However, we have iman because it's mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah. So we have iman, we accept these attributes. But now this is where the mahallun niza is, the locus of dispute, as Mawlana was earlier saying. What do we do in these sifat, in these words, when the word yad, hand comes? Yadullah. Yes? What do we do? So we say we do tafwid. What does tafwid mean? Tafwid means we consign the meaning. What does consigning the meaning mean?
Before we get to tafwid al-ma'na,
do
we do ithbat al-lafz, meaning we believe in the lafz, right?
Yeah, so let me give you an example. So yadun, The word has come yadullahi. Yeah. Fawqa aydihim. Yeah. Their yad, the yad of Allah is upon their hands. Yeah. So we say yadullah, we take the word yad, we say we believe in this, we accept the word. However, the literal meaning of yad, which in the Arabic language is jariha, body limb, we reject this. We say that this does not mean a body limb. Why do we say that this does not mean a body limb? Two reasons. Number one, because of the verse of the Quran where Allah says, there's nothing like him, laysa kamithlihi shay. Allahu samad, Allah is completely independent. Ya ayyuhan nas, antumul fuqara ila Allah. Wallahu al-ghani. Allah is completely independent. So it cannot be a limb because a limb denotes dependency. It denotes contingency. So it can't mean the literal meaning. So we accept the meaning. We accept the word. We reject the literal meaning of that word, yadun. Now this is also called a ta'wil al-ijmali. It is called a brief interpretation. Why is it a brief interpretation? Because we've already said that it doesn't mean literal. It doesn't have a literal meaning. Now we are left with the remaining meanings. So according to Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahmatullah alayhi, as he's mentioned in Fathul Bari, that the word yadun, which literally means hand, has 25 meanings in the Arabic language. The first meaning is jariha, body limb. And the remaining are the metaphorical meanings. It can mean help, it can mean power, it can mean favor, etc., etc. So what would the early Ash'ari do? They'll say that we do tafwid, meaning we accept the word, phase number one, al-marhatul ula, we accept the word. Phase number two, we reject the literal meaning. Why do we reject the literal meaning? Because of other verses of the Quran, and also because reason suggests this. Third step now. Now you're left with 24 meanings. What do? You do not allocate or determine any of the meanings. You consign the meaning. You say it can be any of these 24, but I am not definitively saying which one. Which one is intended definitively only Allah knows. So فوض يفوض تفويضا فهو مفوض صرف صغير سلوما صرف صغير. If فوض يفوض means to consign something. So I have this book. Yes. I say you take this is you take this. You are the not literally give it back to me. Yeah, I actually got worried there for a bit. That was a bad example. So you consign the meaning. I'm not negating the existence of the book. I'm not saying it doesn't have any entity or existence. I'm delegating or consigning, giving over.
So the in other words, you're saying I don't know the meaning.
Yeah.
And Allah knows the meaning.
Yeah. You say I don't know the meaning. It has a meaning, but which meaning is precisely intended, I don't know. So, for example, in the Quran, Allah says, وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. Yes, I delegate, consign my matter to Allah. Allah knows best of this, and Allah will handle this in the best way. This is you could say, the essence of tafwid. So Shaykh Saif al-Asri, hafidhahullah, what he has done is, he's argued in this book that the early Salaf, they consigned the meaning to words like this, sifat khabariya, the revelatory or the textual attributes. And he, as Mawlana said, one of the features of this book is it's got approximately 150 quotes to argue for this point. And he also argues that there was, you could say, a consensus between the early scholars, the Hanabila, the Atharis, so to speak. The reason I'm saying so to speak, because going back to your point about the school, etc. What I find in the literature is more Ahlul Hadith or the Hanabila. I haven't read, unless you've read they're called Athari as a school. Yeah, I haven't seen that yet.
Al-Fudala al-Hanabila.
Yeah. So the early Hanabila or the Ahlul Hadith, they also consigned the meaning as the Ash'ari did. So there was a level of agreement between the early Hanabila, which Shaykh Hatim also argues that there was an agreement between the early Hanabila and the Ash'ari that when it comes to attributes of sifat khabariya, yadun, hand, saq, shin, aynun, etc., they all consign the meaning to Allah. Where the difference between the Ash'ari and the Hanabila was regarding so for example, on page 13 also of Shaykh Hatim book, he mentions that the issue of Tafwid, page 16, he mentioned the actual dispute between the Ash'ari and Hanabila was in ta'wil, whether you are to do an interpretation for those sifat. That was the ikhtilaf.
Yeah.
So Shaykh Saif al-Asri argues that everybody in the early period of Islam, when it came to these attributes, they consigned the meaning. Then the latter Ash'ari, now there's a dispute amongst the scholars that what is the time that differentiate between the Salaf and the Khalaf amongst the Ash'ari and Maturidiyya. Some scholars say is Imam Juwayni, rahimahullah, the teacher of Imam Ghazali. But whatever the case is, they did ta'wil. So what they did was, and back to that example, those 25 meanings, they rejected the meaning. Yes. Now you are left, they rejected the literal meaning. Yep. You are left with 24
meanings,
possible meanings. What did the earlier Salaf do according to this book?
Tafwid.
They consigned the meaning. The later Ash'ari, what they did was, no, they said it could mean this. Mm-hmm. So they did ta'wil. They said, okay, from these 25 meanings, we can't take body limb, we have 24, it means power in this context. Why did they do this ta'wil? Number one, because of necessity, as Ibn Asakir in his Tabyeen al-Kadhib Muftari, he mentions that people were arguing for against Islam. Mm-hmm. They were bringing shubhat and questions that you've got these body limbs mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah.
It's still the case now. It's happened again now. People use these verses. Again.
Yeah.
You know, this idea of darura, I think people didn't know that. When you need.
Yeah.
Now when people are put in a debate saying, how do you explain, because one of the main arguments for God's existence is the argument of contingency, right?
Yes.
So if you're saying that God can't be contingent because contingent things have to have a cause, then how do you explain the contingent attributes in your book?
Yeah.
So then the Muslim has to come back and say, oh, no, it's not contingent.
Yes.
Right? So then you have to then negate what contingency is and then provide some sort of ta'wil. And you say, okay, now I get the wisdom of why it was so important.
Just to add on this, before I continue with this, I had a debate last year with a Christian on the issue of God. And this was my main argument, that the thing that differentiates Islam from other religions, yes, the thing that differentiates us and makes us the only truth, mm-hmm. is that we don't have a corporeal, physical understanding of our God. Mm-hmm. A God is a metaphysical, transcendent being. And this is very important, as Mawlana alluded to. I'm not going to mention the speaker's name, but there was a Christian philosopher in Hyde Park not too long ago. And he was asking the Muslim speaker, do you believe that God comes literally to the heavens? He kept on reiterating this. Now, the Muslim speaker, he said, according to many of our scholars, this is interpreted as XYZ. He said, no, I don't want to know what the Ash'ari are saying. I want to know what you are saying. Now, why was he saying this? Because once you say God literally comes to the heavens, you are justifying hulul. Mm. You are justifying the aqidah that God enters the creation, na'udhu billah. Once you've accepted that he can come to the heavens, then
anything's possible. Then
why can't he come into Jesus?
Yeah.
You see? So anyway, so the Salaf, the Khalaf then, the later scholars, what they did with these sifat khabariya, they said, from these 24 meanings of hand, we will take qudra. We say it means qudra, power.
To context.
For example, why did they do this? Number one, because of necessity. Number two, based on the Arabic language. Yes. Number three, also there is ikhtilaf in the qira'ah in Surah Ali Imran, where Allah speaks about the mutashabihat, the ambiguous verses. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. The only Allah knows the interpretation. وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. Those who are grounded in their knowledge. Some ulama say, well, the qira'ah is recited together. The only Allah knows the interpretation, and those who are grounded. So they had also Quranic argument. Point is, which is very important, that the later scholars who did interpretation, they did not do so definitively. They did not say, well, from these 24 meanings, it has to be qudra. They said possibly is the best plausible explanation. Yeah? And therefore, it's very important to highlight this to the audience. If the later scholars are even incorrect in their interpretation, they are not incorrect in aqidah per se. No. They are incorrect in an interpretation of a word of the Quran.
And the early, what we're talking about, the Hanabila, they were opposed to this. The reason why they were opposed to this was because you're basically speaking about Allah's dhat, Allah's essence based upon speculation.
Yeah.
So they said, if you're speculating a meaning about Allah's essence, that's not allowed. That's why they were against ta'wil. right? Against ta'wil wasn't that, no, it's a jariha, it's a limb. How dare you say that? The condemnation was that you're speculating, and there's many passages that he provides for that.
Yeah.
If I could just add something, if you want to carry on to finish your point, Mohammed.
Yeah, so just to finish, so this is this synopsis of this book that Shaykh Saif al-Asri has argued that this was the aqidah of the Salaf, Tafwid, consigning the meaning. And he gives Quranic reasons from Hadith, and also 150 scholars. And then near the end, he's got a section where he answers some of the objections that, by consigning the meaning, you are saying that the word doesn't have a meaning, or by consigning the meaning, how do you understand the meaning of the verse, etc. So he answers these questions. And just to finish, the refutation on this, which is over 600 sides, by Shaykh Mohammed bin Mahmud al-Khadir, Dr. Shaykh Mohammed bin Mahmud, is over 600 sides. He argues the opposite. And what I mean by opposite is he says that these sifat khabariyah, where Shaykh Saif says you consign the meaning, no, you don't consign the meaning. You affirm the literal meaning. So when it comes to yadun, hand, saqun, shin, etc., in these sifat, in these attributes, you don't consign the meaning as the mufawwid. He calls him mufawwid, the one who consigns the meaning. And he says in the footnotes, I don't say this as a derogatory term, this is what he does. He consigns the meaning, and these arguments that I'm providing will also apply to anybody holding this view. So he argues for that. And one of the, you could say, the features of this book, I think he was trying to do it in comparison with, he also gives over 100 scholars to say that no, is the opposite. But if you read both books carefully, I would say there's a large section in both that you could argue
either way.
So this is where I think where the controversy gets really...
Do they mention the same scholars in both books?
They do.
Overlap as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap, which is very interesting. Yeah, so that is the, you could say, the khulasa of...
Just as a thing, Shaykh Mohammed bin Mahmud, does he argue when he does ithbatul, saying that you have to do ithbat of the literal meaning?
Yes.
Do they also mention that you have to also do tafwid in some sense as well?
So the tafwid that he says is that you do tafwid in the kun or the haqiqah, meaning you affirm the literal meaning, but you consign the knowledge of the reality of that meaning. Yeah. So this is where they do tafwid, because it's tafwid of the kayf, the modality.
Okay.
So they do ithbat of the meaning. They say, yes, yadun means yadun, a'aynun means a'ayn, yes, saqun means saq. But the modality or the howness of these attributes, or the reality of these attributes, this is where we do tafwid. The Ash'ira, remember, they don't do tafwid in the modality. So let me just, I should have mentioned this in the beginning. The claim is, from the Ash'ira, based on Shaykh Saif al-Asri book, that you consign the meaning. The meaning itself you consign.
Yeah.
There is no modality.
Yeah.
There is no, because what is modality? Mawlana will discuss this. Modality has several meanings. But the main technical meaning, which is from the Maqulat al-Ashar, the metaphysical, the 10 metaphysical entities, or the 10 entities, existing entities, one of them is kayf. Kayf means the howness or the modality of something. Something that has a measurement, it has a dimension, it has a miqdar, something that you can...
It has a had.
It has a had, it has a limit. It's something that you can perceive and imagine. Yeah. So the Ash'ira say Allah is freed from that. So we consign the meaning and we reject the modality, the kayf. So it is tafwidul ma'ana, is consigning the meaning.
وَالنَّفْيُ الْكَيْف.
وَالنَّفْيُ الْكَيْف. This is what the Ash'ira say. The Salafi, the Athari, the Hanabila, some of the Hanabila, they say they do tafwid of the kayf. So the ithbat ma'ana, ithbatul ma'ana, they affirm the meaning. So yad means yad, ayn means ayn, saq means saq. What's the howness or the modality? Howness, if that's such a word, yeah. So do forgive me if I just made up a word. The modality of the of these sifat, we consign that. We don't know the reality of the modality, but they affirm the meaning. And the Ash'ira, from the very onset, they consign that meaning.
So so there's going to be a couple of objections that come about with this before we go into this, because that's the mahal al-niza'.
Yeah.
So everyone knows what the actual dispute is. So if you want to have the
Mawlana,
dispute...
do you want to add on that? Was that clear?
No, that's clear. I think that's completely fine, inshallah.
Okay.
So I want to add on the actual specific points, but just to kind of give a few potential objections, and because we want to respond to everything as much as we can, right, as possible, as what we know, so to be as fair as possible. Now, there's some things that I think are missing from some of these discussions in the books, which I think are quite good to kind of add here, just to give a bit more flavor to it, is that Mawlana mentioned a distinction between the sifat. So a common objection is, where'd you get that from? Right? Or contingency. What on earth does that mean? Right? Can you give me a verse of the Quran or a Sahabi talking about contingency, etc., right? Now, there's a way you can respond to this, which is quite simple. If you look at the popular debates, if you ask anyone, whichever side they're on but they have a general attribution to Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, you say, the Quran, what is it? Makhluq or ghair makhluq? Is it created or uncreated? They would say the Quran is uncreated. Is there a single verse of the Quran? Is there a single hadith in the Messenger of Allah where he said the Quran is uncreated? No. Is there a single authentic narration from the Sahaba saying the Quran is uncreated? No. Right? This is something, if you look at Shaykh Albani's notes on the Mukhtasar Ulu of Imam Dhahabi, he explicitly says there's not a single authentic narration from the Sahaba saying the Quran is ghair makhluq. So how did you get to that conclusion? You had to extend from the idea that the Quran is kalamullah, therefore the Quran is ghair makhluq, it's uncreated. So you had to use mind to come to a conclusion. So a division or an extension by its very nature is not false because it's something new. It's whether it's accurate or not.
In line with the Quran's principles.
Exactly. If it's within that, so when we say this sifat al-ma'ani and sifat al-khabariyya, you have to tell us why that's incorrect. You have to tell us that either these are sifat al-ma'ani are not aqli, they're not rational, or the sifat al-khabariyya are aqli. Meaning, tell us where this is a non-argument. You start off by saying, where'd you get that from? That's a non-argument. Even stuff like hulul and ittihad. We say Allah cannot be within the creation. Hulul is something that's a well-known deviant position. Even rejected by across the Salafis also reject that.
Was it pantheism or something?
Pantheism, yeah. So hulul and ittihad, right? This is what they actually accuse Wahid ibn Arabi, right? Wahd al-wujud. The whole idea of that is hulul and ittihad. But where's your explicit evidence?
And they say like this, hululi kuburi.
Yeah.
With that rhythm.
Is it? Oh, no.
Okay, sorry.
I've not heard that.
Okay.
It's going to have to sing it in a bit.
No.
So the idea is that if you're saying, where's your evidence of the negation of hulul?
Yes.
Explicit, not rational. But you're going to use the same verses, what? Laysa kamithli shay.
Yeah.
Right? Or we don't affirm naqa'is, defects for Allah, this is a defect. So you have to, everyone agrees then, that there has to be some level of aql involved. So it's a non-argument to say, because I can't find an explicit verse for that, therefore I'm going to reject it. If you want to say that I don't understand it, then that's not a scholarly position. You're not on the scholarly debate. You follow what I'm saying, right? So if I'm having a debate here, if someone turns up and says, it's like me saying, let's have a debate, and you say, okay, my point is I don't want the debate.
Okay.
They say, right, then why are you debating? Right? You can't come to the debate and say, I don't want the debate.
Yeah.
I don't. So that's a non-starting point. You have to demonstrate why the aql being used is incorrect. So with the Mu'tazila, it was never the fact that, you're using aql. The Mu'tazila was the fact that you're using incorrect aql. You're using your rational mind in an incorrect, you're using speculative things and making it as being definitive. Or you're misinterpreting the Quran or so on and so forth. That's what the debate has to be. For those who don't want to engage in the debate, then their name should not pop up in the debate.
Yeah.
Right? And there's many debates like that. Look, there's a lot of these kalam discussions, right, that I don't get into at all, where Imam Fakhruddin Razi will talk about some, details of falsafa, etc. I can't say, right, I want to be part of the debate by saying I don't have to have a position on this. Then I'm not part of the debate. That's their argument. If you're following, right? So so when we're having these kind of distinctions or even elaborations, you don't require specific evidence for it. If so, then we would say, don't say the Quran is ghair makhluq.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's the most authentic narration. That's one of the authentic narration of Abu Hanifa. It's to tawaqquf on the discussion of Quran ghair makhluq, to tawaqquf on that. That goes in the Fadail of Abu Hanifa ibn Abi Awam. So do we then say that the Salaf, if you read Imam Bukhari, Imam Ahmed said the Salaf didn't say ghair makhluq. That's correct, right? The Salaf at that time didn't say ghair makhluq. Bring me Ibn Mas'ud raising ghair makhluq. They said, no. Their view would have been this if they were exposed to the discussion that we're exposed to.
Yes.
Therefore, we're saying their view would have been this distinction we made, right? If they were exposed to the specifics that we were exposed to, because so when you say Quran is ghair makhluq, then you have a discussion of this saying, okay, is it harf and sawt? If someone says to say it's not harf and sawt is a bid'ah, then the whole makhluq is a bid'ah.
Yeah.
So prove why it's wrong. You can't use an authority debate, because if you use an authority debate, that means in the time of the Imam Ahmed, the authority would have said nothing about the topic.
Yeah.
Right? Are you guys following? So you can't arbitrarily stop the rational discussion. You can't say at the 4th century, just like the doors of ijtihad were closed, the doors of aql was closed as well.
Yeah.
Right? That's not an argument. So that's, I want to just push that, because sometimes when, so like what Mawlana mentioned, they'll be like, that's a good point, but then there'll be like, as I say, objection saying, oh, where'd you got a salaf for that distinction? That's irrelevant. Right? You have to prove why it's incorrect. Rather, we'll go even one step further. Even if, let's say Imam Bukhari, let's say even Imam Ahmed, for argument's sake, we're not conceding, but for argument's sake, let's say they were on the view of Ibn Taymiyyah, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, 100%, for argument's sake. It is still not hujjah. It's still not evidence. Correct? Right? When we're having fiqh debates and you're having a bahath, and I say Imam Hanifa said this, many Salafis will turn around and say, well, he's not the Prophet, is he?
He's not hujjah.
He's not hujjah.
Even though he's from the Salaf.
Even from the Salaf, right? We're talking before Imam Ahmed, right?
Yeah.
It's not hujjah. Imam Hanifa said the Quran, the Iman is only qawl, is iqrar, tasdeeq and iqrar. It's only affirmation of the heart, belief in the heart, affirmation of the tongue. They say, yeah, but he's wrong. Amal is part of Iman. But he's from the Salaf. So you're happy to do that. So then, even if for argument's sake, let's say you prove it, that Imam Ahmed and all these scholars, Imam Bukhari, were on that same position, it doesn't make any difference. Because this is not a mas'ala of taqleed, it's a mas'ala of whether they're right or wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
At most, it's isti'nas. Otherwise, you can't use it as your core
100%.
argument.
So when sometimes these discussions, I think, get distracted, right? They get into a discussion of what did Imam Tabari actually say?
Yeah.
Did Imam Tabari actually say this or not? And like I'm saying, you can have that discussion. It's a very good case to demonstrate. I'm not having an issue with that at all. And I'll say Shaykh Hatim demonstrates it for many, like Imam Tirmidhi, Ibn al-Bar, Khattabi demonstrates that. But I'm saying is, even if you get it right, understand that's not the mahal niza'. That's the mahal niza' if you're saying, I am doing taqleed in this, meaning I don't know, I'm following authorities. Then if you're following authorities, then you shouldn't be debating.
Yeah.
Following muqallid in a topic, if they don't understand that specific topic, they don't participate in the debate.
100%.
Right? Al-muqallid nuskhat min kitab. Right? A muqallid is just a text of a book. They're not the one talking. So just give me the book then. You go ahead.
It's ma'doon.
Yeah. So that's why people don't understand this. So when you have a debate with Imam Tabari said this, it's a good debate.
Yeah.
It's a good discussion. But remember, that's not the mahal niza'. Right? Unless Imam Tabari becomes an authority in terms of what hujjah mulzima, that his position becomes binding as believers, then you can use that. But otherwise, even then, you're not actually going to the actual mahal niza' with the disputes.
So in terms of then, what does Shaykh Hatim actually mention about Tafwid?
If I can make an introduction about Shaykh Hatim, and then I'll let Mawlana come in. So I've been reading the works of Shaykh Hatim for a number of years. I think Mawlana, you started reading more of his works more recently, right?
Yeah. Mawlana, are you going to come back to this book?
Yes. So we're going to do is we're going to go through Shaykh Hatim.
That's fine.
And then the specific, although it's not directly rather to this, but the specific points, we'll come back to them.
That's fine.
Yeah. So we keep that there. Because we're going to look at his main arguments and then see if anything responded to.
Yeah.
So Shaykh Hatim, I think you've come to my reading Shaykh Hatim the last couple of years.
I've come to Shaykh Hatim through your barakah.
Oh, jazakallah.
No, seriously, Mawlana introduced me.
I think many people have.
I think my first book was on this Takfir Ahl Shahadatain.
Right.
And then I think then this is the second book.
Oh, okay.
I've purchased all his books now, most of them, when I went to Turkey last month. But yeah, so this is my second book.
I came across Shaykh Hatim now, would have been, I was in Madrasa, I was in Mishkat. And I didn't know what I was looking, I was just Googling books. And that was before Mishkat, I think, right?
So you using Google in Madrasa?
Yeah, I was Googling my books, trying to find out what books were up there, right? And so I found a book.
You didn't specify whether I was in class or outside of class.
So I found his book called Ijma' al-Muhaddithin, right? And it's before that, before Mishkat, I think before, I can't remember now the dates now, right? But I remember reading it, I didn't really get it. Right? Because Imam Hadithin is such a niche topic and I didn't know what he was talking about, but I knew I liked it, right? It looked like this guy knows what he's talking about. And then after that, I kind of heard a bit of his name, but again, he wasn't that popular. No one really knew of him. So then I started getting what books are coming out of his. I'll try to purchase them and read them. And one of the things that Shaykh Hatim has done, and I want to talk more about in hadith, but separate, because it's going to go off, because that's his main contribution. But whether you are a fan of the Shaykh or you're not a fan of the Shaykh, right? There's two things I think you have to concede. One is that when you read the Shaykh, you benefit.
No
right?
doubt.
So meaning, even if you disagree with his points, right? And there are a few issue points that, not in this so much, but in other works that maybe have some things that, I'm not too comfortable with or not fully agree, but you benefit because he'll pull out quotations, he'll pull out discussions, and he'll look at perspectives that you don't normally think of. So you benefit, even if you're a opponent, you have to agree to that. And the second thing that the Shaykh tries to do, even if you don't agree with it, but what the Shaykh does is two things, which is tahrir al-mas'ala, which is the fact to look at what exactly is the discussion. So what you do is tahrir, trying to unravel it, and then mahal niza'. What is the actual dispute? So get to the jugular. If you can get to the jugular of a discussion, you don't need a 600-page book. You don't need a 1,000-page book, right? Sometimes even an article is sufficient, right? Even Western academia, there's certain times that they'll say, this is a groundbreaking article. And someone opens, it's 20 pages. What's 20 pages? But you don't have to talk so much, right? Because if you get to the jug, you know what the actual discussion is. You can get to that conclusion very quickly, right? So the Shaykh does that a lot, where he will go into a topic and he'll grab it by the jugular and then discuss it from there. Now, you can disagree with it, but you have to appreciate the process. So if you don't agree with it, then you have to say, all right, now you tell me what the jugular is then. Right? So when it comes to ibadah, if you remember, right? So Shaykh says, well, the fundamental discussion is saying that if something is ibadah in one sense, it should be ibadah somewhere else. You can't say if the same thing is not and it is. So he gives a definition, says, this is my definition to distinguish between what ibadah and what isn't. You tell me your definition, right? And that puts everyone on the back foot. How do I define it? So that's what the Shaykh does in all of his discussions. Whether you agree at the end is irrelevant. I'm not talking about it right now, but the point is that's what he does. These are two qualities of the Shaykh, which is highly impressive. And you'll find very few people to do that. And then for the Shaykh to go to a range of topics. So in hadith was that was his forte, right? But then to kind of dabble into these other ulum and to do similar type of contributions. This book, even amongst the Ash'aris, have been considered to be a game changer. So, and lastly, I'll say before I let Shaykh come and talk a bit about the book and then we'll go back and forth on it, is that there was a lot of propaganda about the book. And this sometimes happens, right? Is that an article or book or something comes out. We've experienced it personally, right? That something comes out, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Right? Don't mix with me.
So what happens, propaganda comes about. What the book or the article is about, or like selections from it, right? So what people did with this book was like, they'll bring a quotation from it. And I say, look, the Shaykh, how harsh he is. Or there'll be a quote saying, oh, look, the Shaykh just dismisses his study in one line. And I remember even myself, when I was reading that, or like, oh, the Shaykh just puts a list of 90 people. What's that got to do? A list of scholars. That's not academic. That's just the argument of authority. And I'll be completely honest with you. At one point I thought, maybe because I was waiting for the book to come. It was taking ages, right? So I was waiting. I was like, maybe he messed up quite badly here, right? Maybe it's quite poor, because that's how much the propaganda was. And then when I put that to a side and I just sat and I read through it, you think, right, now I actually know what the book is actually about, and whether it's worth a read or what not worth a read. And I will tell you one thing, there are certain things that we'll talk about, the objections about it, but as a whole, this book is going to be very, very difficult for someone to respond to. And not only difficult to respond to, I was saying that it would be a game changer for the fact that, similar to Shaykh Saif al-Asri, is because like Shaykh Saif al-Asri, Shaykh Hatim is more of an expert in hadith and expert in the transmitted sciences, so isnad and these kind of discussions. And if you're trying to have a discussion with a Salafi, because that's the school of thought and that's the language they understand, when you have an expert talking through that lens, it's actually far more effective than, let's say, Mawlana quoting Sunusi or someone like that, which would be rationally more effective. So I mean, if you're from looking at what's a stronger rational argument, you say, yeah, of course that's a stronger, but then that's not necessarily going to be compelling to the specific person you're talking to. So like that, I think is a very effective book, because you see him constantly citing Salafi PhD dissertations, all throughout the footnotes are filled with that kind of stuff. Very intimate knowledge of Ibn Taymiyyah, not a knowledge of Ibn Taymiyyah based upon just kalam. That's another thing, right? Because normally when people come into a debate or discussions, they only read the relevant parts about the opponent, which are relevant to your discussion. The Shaykh has had a whole, decades reading Ibn Taymiyyah. So he has a very intimate knowledge of how Imam Ibn Taymiyyah thinks. So it's a very, very good book, worth a read. And like anything, put the stuff to the side online, read the book from cover to cover, and then see what you come out with it. If you come out as a Salafi and you say, I disagree, the bare minimum you come out with is appreciation. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to say that I have that same conviction that you had before. If you still think I don't agree, to have that same force and conviction, I'll be hard-pressed to think someone could read that and still have that. I'm going to stop with the book and then we'll talk about that.
So as Mawlana Shaykh Zeeshan alluded, this book by Shaykh Hatim al-Awni, it deals with the topic of Tafwid, as we mentioned in the beginning, from a narration perspective. So he comes from a different angle. And as you can see in the title, Istiwā ma'lūm wal-kayf majhūl, which means Istiwā is known and kayf, the modality, is unknown. So what is this? Istiwā is known and kayf is unknown. Going back to the distinction that I made, sifat aqliya and sifat khabariya, the rational attributes and the revelatory attributes. In the revelatory attributes, I mentioned the Ash'ari, we say we consign the meaning. So yadun, hand, we consign the meaning. Ayn, eye, we consign the meaning. Among those attributes of khabariya is also istiwa. The word istiwa that comes in the Quran approximately 7 times, 6 or 7 times. ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى عَلَى الْعَرْشِ. Then Allah did istiwa upon the throne. So the title here is suggesting a very famous narration from Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi. Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi, once he was asked, what does the word istiwa mean in the verse ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى عَلَى الْعَرْشِ? So Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi replied that the istiwa is known and the kayf, the modality, is unknown, and you are a person of bid'ah, that you are trying to dwell and ponder over these attributes, and he was taken out of the gathering, that person. I'm paraphrasing the narration. Now Shaykh Hatim, in this book, he argues, there's a few arguments that he makes. The first argument, you could say, is regarding the authenticity of the narration. So al-istiwa ma'loom. The Imam Malik says istiwa is known and the kayf is unknown. This is evidence for the Salafis.
Tafwid al-kayf and ifrat al-ma'na.
Yeah, because they, what does Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi say? We know the meaning, and we don't know the reality or the howness, the modality. So down here, Imam Malik saying that istiwa is known.
Ma'loom al-ma'na.
Yeah, ma'loom ma'na. We know the meaning, but the reality we do not know. Or the modality we do not know. So the first thing is, Shaykh Hatim argues from a narration perspective that this narration is not the most authentic narration.
In terms of the wording?
Yeah, in the wording. The most authentic narration is that istiwa is ma'loom and the kayf is ghayr ma'qul, cannot be perceived, or wal kayf anhu marfu, the kayf is not applicable. Which now suggests the Ash'ari position. Yeah. The Ash'ari say, they say exactly what the Ash'ari say, that we consign the meaning, but we reject the modality because there is no modality. But I want to clarify here. Can
I just read the actual quote?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just reading.
Yeah, so he says, عن الإمام مالك هو الذي يقول فيه إمام مالك الرحمن على العرش استوى كما وصف نفسه. Allah على العرش استوى, as he described himself, ولا يقال كيف وكيف عنه مرفوع. كيف is lifted from him, وأنت رجل سوء صاحب بدعة أخرجوه, that you are an evil man, a person of bid'ah, take him out. فقال فأخرج الرجل, so the man was taken out of the masjid.
Yes, so very clear that ولا يقال كيف. كيف cannot even be said about this, meaning it's not applicable. And the other one is where غير معقول, something that cannot even come in our aql, it's not applicable.
It's not comprehensible.
Yeah, it's inconceivable. So now this narration, it argues for the Ash'ari because they reject the modality. But I want to put in a very important caveat, and this will also, I think, want to deal with some of the refutations. Shaykh Hatim al-Awni is not saying, his entire argument is not that this is the most authentic narration, therefore we disregard everything else. Because some of the refutations that I've read, they're saying, well, you can't call the other narrations, like the Kayf Majhul narration, you can't call it weak. Yeah, you can't call it weak from a hadith perspective. Maybe Mawlana Zeeshan will speak on this better. Shaykh Hatim Awni is not saying this. He is saying in light of all of the narrations, which this is the most authentic narration, even though the others can be authentic, what's more plausible is to say Kayf is not applicable. But now the first clause, al-istiwa ma'loom, is istiwa is known. So Shaykh Hatim al-Awni, he gives 4 plausible explanations. What does istiwa ma'loom mean?
Before we go on to this, I have a question here. The asl of the kitab, why does Shaykh Hatim actually even deal with Imam Malik's narration specifically? Like, what's his, out of all the narrations of the Salaf that talk about this topic, why is his quote taken?
Because Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi's quote is a central quote for Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi. And this is why Shaykh Hatim, he argues in the beginning, I believe is on page 15, final paragraph, that it was Imam Ibn Taymiyyah who was the first Hanbali scholar who said regarding the sifat khabariyah that you affirm the meaning and you consign the modality, the kayf. And he uses this narration, Imam Malik. Before of Imam Malik. Before Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, nobody used this narration specifically to argue that the meaning is known and the modality is unknown. So because it plays a central role in the position of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, this is why he argues for this. So I was saying, so now we are left with the first clause, al-Istiwā ma'al Imam Malik. Okay, the second clause, we could argue that the most authentic narration is wal-kayf anhu marfu' or wal-kayf ghayr ma'kul, etc. But what are you going to say about al-Istiwā ma'alum? Imam Malik clearly said it's al-Istiwā ma'alum. So this is where Shaykh Hatim, he then gives explanations that al-Istiwā ma'alum could be ma'alum al-wurud wa thubut, that the word istiwa is known. Yeah, or the word istiwa is known, meaning in terms of creation. We know what the word means amongst ourselves. He gives these approximately four explanations, and then he explains why it cannot be that the meaning is known. Like Imam Malik did not say al-istiwa ma'nahu ma'lum. Like the meaning of istiwa is known. And he also then has, we'll probably go into this, why that the question, when he asked the question, was he asking regarding the meaning or regarding the modality? Imam Ibn Taymiyyah argues that no, he was asking regarding the modality.
Because one of the wordings is kayfa istawa.
Yeah. He was asking regarding the modality, and because he was asking regarding the modality, Imam Malik said, "Tell him to get out because he's a mubtadi'." But the counter argument would be that if he was asking regarding the modality and the meaning was known, why did Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi give the meaning? Yes, Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi, he didn't tell them. He just said al-istiwa ma'lum.
This goes into the fact that the ma'na and kayf are intimately linked.
Exactly.
So you have to make that distinction. Yeah.
If something has a meaning, it has a modality. Yes. So he does give the argument, but I think the central part of this book is, which is the most interesting part, arguably one of the most interesting part, is this statement of Imam Malik. Shaykh Hatim al-Awni gives approximately from page 87 to 300 scholars who he argues,
over 90
scholars, who he argues that these scholars, they understood Imam Malik's statement to be tafwid of the meaning, because he just said istiwa is known. Yeah, the word istiwa is known. He didn't say the meaning is known, and the kayf is not applicable. He gives approximately 90 scholars to substantiate this pivotal point. But what's more interesting is that from these 90 or so scholars, he gives 34 Maliki scholars, Maliki authority. And why is this? Because some people say, well, this is just number. Yeah, but it's very important to understand, if you have Maliki authorities, and some of these authorities, by the way, were the students of Imam Malik who predate Imam Abu al-Hasan Ash'ari. So if they are saying that this is the statement of their Imam, they are in a better position to understand their Imam.
This goes back to saying Sahibul Bayt adra bima fi.
Exactly, and he actually says this in like an amusing way, that some of the contemporary Salafis think they understand the Maliki school better than the scholars of Imam Malik or the school of Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi. And so that is you could say, the summary of the book. It's from a narration, very specific narration. And as you asked, why is this specific narration? Because Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi's pivotal claim, who Shaykh Hatim argues to be the first person to say this, it rests on this narration, or you could say a significant part of that claim rests on this claim, on this narration. And the other thing which is really interesting about this book,
before we go into that, just pick up on this point, Mawlana. So I read, or I heard one of the responses to the book, right? And it was talking about this specific point, that it's a central quote to the whole discussion. And the person who was speaking was mentioning that this response, or this claim, I think the exact quote that Shaykh Hatim mentions, that after Imam Ibn Taymiyyah found that there was mutawatir quotes from the Salaf saying that you should do Tafwid al-Ma'na, he didn't find anything else to kind of prove his point aside from Imam Malik's quote. So the person was responding to this and saying that if you look at Imam Ibn Taymiyyah's works though, he doesn't actually just rest on this one singular quote, but rather he quotes other figures of the Salaf like Imam al-Awza'i and others, even sometimes before quoting Imam Malik or instead of quoting Imam Malik at all. So how would we kind of respond to that? Because that's kind of like a foundational manhaji point for the book, right? Yeah. If it's not central to Imam Ibn Taymiyyah's argument, then there are other quotes that we have to deal with, not just this one.
So in terms of a response, so there's a couple of things that you can look at this. So one is the question about the structure of the book, right? So the structure of the book doesn't follow the way where you're trying to approach a topic saying, okay, what are sifat? What are the lughawi, the linguistic, technical definition of it? Tafwid. What did they say? What is tafwid? And then kind of break it down. And that's been a critique of the book as well. And to be honest, I would say that that's a fair critique if you're looking at the book in terms of some sort of like a dissertation or something where someone's trying to approach the topic. What it looks more like to me, the book is that Shaykh Hatim came across, was hearing the statement of Imam Malik. So we can't underplay the statement now, right? To suggest that it's just one amongst many. No, this is one of the most famous statements commonly used, right? And most people memorized as well. So he kind of takes that as like a case study, and then he finds wordings of it which are not utilized as much, but is very much clear to the contrary of the meaning that's been interpreted, right, amongst in Salafi discourses. So he puts that forward, and then he kind of and then it kind of expands into this kind of book. But we have to understand that the book has other elements to it as well, which is important. So yes, as a point, saying that is if you've disproven Imam Malik quote, but what about this quote? What about that quote? Or this quote? I would say two things. Number one is that Shaykh Hatim does discuss many of the other quotations. There's many other quotations that he discusses. It goes into quite a lot of detail and demonstrates what he believes to be the correct interpretation of them. But secondly, there's a fundamental argument of the book, which I think I think it's a good time to introduce it, is that going back to the notion of you affirming the meaning. So put it this way, let's understand this point, right? Let's say I have a statement, and my statement could be interpreted in two ways. Interpretation A, interpretation B, right? A is an absurdity, and B can make sense.
It's a rational possibility.
Not just rational possibility, just makes sense. We're not looking, not like a advanced accolade, just a simple point, right? You make something could be an absurd point, or you can interpret as being sound. When you're looking at my passage, right, you're going to, if you have husnul dhan, you think I'm a scholar or someone that's relatable, you're going to try to incline towards the view that is not absurd, right? So one of the things, and I'm going to go to some of the isnad discussions as well in a second, inshallah, but you have this Imam Malik quote, and you've got the other Imam, the Salaf as well, that have said statements, and let's say they can be interpreted both ways. So we're saying that your interpretation has a wajh, like it can be that. But now let's look at what your interpretation of their view has them believing. It has them believing in this notion of al-Qadr mushtarak. And this is a point that Shaykh Hatim, when I talk about Shaykh getting to the jugular and not letting him move away from this, is something that is throughout the whole book. So if you're asking me what's the core of the book, I think the book should have been called Qadr Mushtarak, right? Is that this is important because it seems like it was like a bahas that kind of expanded into a book. And I've experienced that. I've written something small and it expands and it turns into a work, but the goal wasn't that overarching book. But then he catches the jugular in there, which is, what is this notion of Qadr Mushtarak? The idea is that, in a very simple term, right? I'll give you as an example, right? I say to you, and this example I gave to Mawlana before, I say, I have a car, right? And you say, but you haven't seen it, right? So you say, okay, so that means you're understanding what a car is. And I say, yes, I have a car in terms of what we understand cars to mean. What some of the scholars, especially amongst modern Salafis, will say, al-ma'na al-zahir. Al-ma'na al-zahir, right? This is a book written, La Ma'na wa la Kayf, by Dr. Ahmed. It's on that passage by Dr. Ahmed Gharib. I wrote an Arabic response to one of his arguments as well. You can see on the Telegram channel, right? It's a response. It's the same point here. They'll say, ala ma'na dhahir. Ma'na dhahir means is the dhahir is the usuli dhahir. What does that mean? Any of the students of knowledge here can open up usul al-shashi or any book usul al-fiqh. Go to the meaning of dhahir. So you have dhahir, nas, muhkam, mufassar, muhkam, right? So you look at dhahir, they'll say, ما يفهم بنفس السماع. That is understood by hearing, by mere listening to it, the meaning that comes to your mind. Or ما يتبادر إلى ذهن. The first thing goes to your mind. So when I say car to you, what's the first meaning that goes to your mind? You're thinking of a car. So I'll be right to say to you, define me the car. Right? So you're going to have to give me some definitions. If I say define me the car and you say that's the kayf, that's the modality, then you're recognizing that the kayf, the modality and the meaning are the same. But if I say to you, no, I have a car, but it doesn't have wheels, right? It doesn't have an engine. It doesn't have a steering wheel. So then you say, what are you left with? Because ma'na zahir is, I'm picturing a car, but you say, no, it's not what you're picturing. You're left with just a word. But if you're saying, if it's Ibn Taymiyyah or the modern Salafis, they're saying that, no, we affirm the meaning, the ma'na zahir, then I'm saying, what amount of the car are you affirming? Or what's the meaning of it? So I know that we're affirming the meaning. If you're not giving me a meaning of hand, you're not giving a meaning of istiwā, you're not giving a meaning of nuzul. So nuzul means to descend, right? So you're saying, no, Allah descends, His Dhat descends. Are we saying a movement below or up to it? Are you affirming that? If you're refusing to do so, right, then you're basically on the same camp that we are, because you've left with no meaning.
It goes in a circle.
Exactly. So this is why, the reason why I don't think it's important to even have the discussion so much is that most Salafis, and this actually is a point mentioned by Shaykh Mawlana Sariri as well, is that most people that you engage with don't actually believe that, because the fitrah kicks in and says that's not true. Yeah. Right? Because the fitrah kicks in and say, no, Allah doesn't move. Right?
So the fitrah makes him mufawwid.
No, that's exactly what he says. Because the fitrah makes him mufawwid. So there's no need to push that. But if you're going to say, no, it's movement. Right? No, the hand is a limb, but it's a limb kama yaliqu bi jalalihi or something like that,
you
right?
have to own the lawazim.
If you own the lawazim, and this is not just, this is the lazim, so there's two types of lazim, right? So one would be a lazim, which is, it's possible, but I am pushing you towards one. One lazim, which is, this is the only interpretation you have.
Yeah.
So if you have for yad wajib, what I want to see, if you really affirm the meaning, is to give me yad and say, okay, this is the linguistic meaning of yad, this is the linguistic meaning of wajh, this is the linguistic meaning of saq, and this is the qadr mushtarak, because for a meaning to be affirmed, there has to be an overlap between the two, so we know what the meaning is. If there's no overlap, that's two separate words.
Yeah.
You've then affirmed a majaz then. Because if it's not the limb, or you have a different definition which is not limb, and this is what Shaykh Hatim is trying to get. So even if, this is why Shaykh has layered arguments, even if Imam Malik is saying what you're saying, then you're attributing to something absurd. Even the Salaf are saying what you're saying, you're attributing something absurd. Right? So even if our ta'weel of their statement is less, even though that's the zahir what they're saying, but let's say the ta'weel of the statements are wrong, right? Oh, so it's not that strong, but our husnul dhan forces us to take that. And we have many examples of this, by the way, right? Where a statement of a sahabi or something that goes against something, so we try to interpret it in ways that makes them look good rather than the negative meaning. So this is one of the core which kind of comes throughout his work.
I think a question here that comes to mind, which I've heard others mention as well, is that especially when it comes to, for example, the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, etc., when they mention certain wordings and then we make an effort to interpret them in a good light so that it doesn't lead to absurdity, the question then comes is, okay, but why did then this particular Sahabi or this particular Tabi'i use this particular wording that leads to this?
Yeah, but these discussions predate our current discourses.
Yeah.
Right? These are stuff that were not the implication when they were saying it. So therefore, the language you use is not going to be as precise compared to when the discussion becomes more...
I mean, Imam Muhammad Ghazali, rahmatullah alayhi, he discussed this in his Iljam al-Awam and Ilm al-Kalam. This is his final book. And he passed away a few days after this, rahmatullah alayhi. In there, he has a discussion about ijtima and iftiraq, mentioning these sifat in a single context, or mentioning them separately. So, for example, going back to the sifat khabariya, yadun, saqun, aynun. He says the reason the Sahaba ridwanullah ajma'in, they heard these sifat and they understood these sifat, but nobody took the literal meaning, was because the Prophet ﷺ never mentioned these together. This is a very crucial point. You will not find in amongst the Sahaba or the early Salaf that, they mention hand, shin in one context. So there was no iham, there was no possibility of anthropomorphism, of corporeality. But when you mention those sifat together, if I say hand, yadun, saqun, aynun in a single context, like some scholars then did, then of course you're going to get them.
But the reason why they did so was because the Mu'tazila were rejecting these as sifat. So when they reject it as sifat, now you're forced to. It's the whole point. They're doing something that Salaf didn't do, but you're forced to out darura. So this is why when you say, no, but look, Ibn Khuzaymah or this Imam did it. You say, fine. But they didn't do what the Salaf did. So, yeah, but because of darura. I say, okay, so you accept that because of darura, you can use further, as long as within the scope of what they spoke. Yes, but that's exactly what was happening here.
Al-Qadr al-Mushtari, if I can just add on that, that's very important. Like Mawlana rightly mentioned, this is the jugular. And this you can see probably the most important part of the book. And even this book, the refutation, Shaykh Saif al-Asri's book, this is an important principle. Shaykh Mohammed bin Mahmud, the refutation of the Ashri book. Now, just to I don't think if what is al-Qadr al-Mushtarak? This is a principle that was mainly explicated by Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayhi, and everybody after who follows the school of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, they mention this principle. So al-Qadr al-Mushtarak, al-Qadr means element, yes, and Mushtarak means a common, a shared element. They're saying that in order to understand language itself, or to understand the sifat, there has to be a common element between the words that are used for the creator and the words that are used for the creation. So for example, let me take an example from the sifat aqliyah, the rational attributes. Ilm. What does ilm mean? Knowledge. So the word ilm means knowledge. There's a al-Qadr al-Mushtarak. There is a common element through which we understand that there's an ilm for Allah and we understand that the ilm for creation. Although the reality is different. Fahimtum? Understand this? Now, they apply the same principle, al-Qadr al-Mushtarak, to sifat khabariyah. They say yadun. The word yadun, it means hand. There's a yadun which is attributed towards Allah, and there's a yadun which is attributed towards a man. They have al-Qadr al-Mushtarak, a common element through which we understand the yad which is attributed towards Allah and a yad which is attributed towards creation. Do you understand it? This is a principle that is explicated again and again by the Salafi scholars in their books, especially in this refutation. Now the issue here is, and this I think Mawlana, this is the crux of the entire topic, which Mawlana gives the analogy of the car. You say, okay, there has to be a basic element which is shared in order to understand that word. What is that? Let's take yadun as an example. What is yadun? What is the al-Qadr al-Mushtarak in which you understand the yad of God and the yad of man? They will say, the Arabic dictionary will say is jariha, for example, is a body limb. They'll say, no, it's not a body limb. Is it blood and flesh? No, these are lawazim, these are the entailments, like Mawlana said. We have two types of entailments. You have lazim qareeb and lazim ba'id. You have a direct entailment that cannot be disconnected, and then you have a certain a distant entailment which can be avoided, which can be deflected. So in this case of yadun, what is the common element? Is it blood and flesh? No, it's not blood and flesh. Is it jariha? Is it limb? No. Is it a physical, corporeal entity? No, it isn't.
Then what is it?
Then what is it? And this is I don't think they have an answer for this.
So the common thing of, I just put it to you, you can respond to it.
Yeah.
But there's different types of yad in Arabic language, right? The yad al-bab,
yad al-namal, yad al-sa'a.
They're all very different.
Yeah.
So yad Allah is different.
Yeah. So this is where they argue that, look, we say the hand of the clock, even though I think that's metaphorical, but khair, hand of the clock, hand of the elephant, I don't know if elephant's got a hand, but you get me.
The door
Our hand, door hand. These are all hands, but their kayfiyah, their modality is different.
But the name is the same.
The name is the same. The very easy response is that the al-Qadr Mushtarak in this, the common element in this, is a body limb.
It's a part.
It's a part. It's got a physical, limited dimension, a corporeality, physicality, which denotes contingency, which denotes that it's created, etc. The hand of a clock, my hand, your hand, whatever the modality is, whatever the form and shape is, it is a tangible, limb thing. And that is problematic. You see? So this is why Mawlana mentioned a very good phraseology that some of these guys, they are covert mufawwidh. And like this book by Shaykh Mohammed bin Mahmoud, he does not answer this. He keeps on reiterating Imam Ibn Taymiyyah's objection. Well, but you affirm ilm, you affirm the other, and like you said that there is no similarity between the ilm of Allah and the ilm of creation. In the same way we see there is no similarity between the yad of God and yad of creation. But this is where the difference is. There's a distinction between the knowledge of God and so the word ilm. Let's take ilm as an example. Ilm and yadun. What is the difference?
One's physical, one's not.
Yeah. Let me first talk about epistemic difference. You know, sometimes we say, oh, where have you got this categorization? You know, as Mawlana was mentioning at the beginning. One of the reasons why there is this categorization is because how the Quran speaks of these two attributes. If you look at the attributes of the ma'ani, or the aqliya, those are mentioned in a context where those attributes are in and of themselves objective of the verse. So for example, Allah says, وَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ وَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ. Know that Allah is alim. Know that Allah is basir, that He's all watching, and know that He's all knowing. إِنَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Know that He has power over everything. So Allah will mention an injunction, He will mention a hukm, a judgment, and then He will remind us at the end of the verse that take heed, uphold this injunction. Why? Because He is Sami', He is Basir, He is Alim. So He will mention the sifat aqliya as an objective, as a maqsid of the verse. Yes. If you look at sifat khabariya, aynun, yadun, nowhere in the Quran has Allah mentioned that God, na'udhu billah, has a yad or ayn. Nowhere. Those sifat are mentioned dhimnan, inclusively, in a larger context. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking regarding the ship of Nuh alayhi salam. He said, tajri bi a'yunina. This ship was sailing under our a'yun. A'yun is plural of ayn. It could mean protection, it could mean guidance, etc. That's the first thing. The second major difference is that if you extract the literal meaning of sifat aqliya, knowledge, power, it denotes perfection. Ilm is perfection. Qudra is perfection. Conversely, if you extract the literal meaning of a hand,
it denotes a limit.
Limit, contingency, something that is limited to a corporeal entity is a contingent being which has been created. It's subjected to the vicissitudes of time, space, etc. Yes? Now this is where it gets, I think. So, but we still affirm ilm. Okay, we still affirm ilm for Allah and ilm for creation. But ilm is a property. What I mean by property is, it is a meaning which subsists with the entity. It is a meaning that subsists with the entity.
It's indivisible from it.
So let's give a general rasm, because we can't give a had definition for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because only Allah knows the reality of Himself. La ya'lamullah illa Allah. Only Allah knows Him true self. But just to give a brief description of what ilm is. Ilm is idrakul ma'lum ala ma huwa alayh. For example, that knowledge is the perception, or the understanding of the object which is known as it is. Now this idrak, this perception, this understanding is not a tangible thing. It is what? It is a property which subsists within the entity. On the other hand, yadun, the literal meaning is what?
Limb.
A limb. You can't disconnect that limb from that meaning. Limb is the intrinsic meaning. Whereas in it, the meaning of ilm, you can't disconnect bodies, you can't disconnect contingencies, you can't disconnect physicalities.
You can have ilm without any body or anything connected.
So down there you say, yes, our ilm is idrakul ma'lum, but our ilm is contingent, is created, etc. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ilm is pre-eternal. And the realities can be completely distinct. But down here, if you're going to affirm the literal meaning, you can't say, well, na'udhu billah is a limb, but it's pre-eternal. It doesn't make sense. You see? So in summation, what I would say is, just to any meaning that demonstrates the contingent being of the Creator or the contingent being of God, that meaning should be rejected. In sifat aqliya, we can disconnect all those contingencies. So, well, you use the ear, or for example, you use your book to study. I need knowledge, yeah? So how do I gain knowledge?
Read a book.
Read a book. But reading a book to gain knowledge is al-hukm al-aadi, is nomenological judgment. Meaning normally, a regularity for the creation is that we need to read a book. But knowledge in itself can be perceived without the book.
Yes.
This is only for me, you see. Whereas yadun, for example, so you can disconnect those contingency and hawadith. But with sifat khabariya, you can't disconnect those intrinsic meaning which denote contingency.
The word is intrinsically connected.
So this is why I say, with all due respect, in this book, the Shaykh has said, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah doesn't believe as a body limb, he doesn't believe as a physical entity, he doesn't believe. Then you're asking the question then, what is al-Qadr mushtarak then? What is that basic common element that you say is necessary to affirm in order to understand the word? So I would say, honestly, some parts of this book, I thought he's a mufawwidh. But he's not saying it. Yes.
Yes, because he actually uses a quote of Dhahabi, I believe, where he actually negates jism.
Yeah.
You're left with nothing if you do that.
But there's one interesting point that he does here, though, to answer this objection. You say, well, okay, what is the common element? The common element is body limb. And the interesting thing is, let me just quote this, regarding Imam Ibn Kathir rahmatullahi alayhi here, I have, he mentioned this on page 413, which is very interesting. Then I realized, look, now they're making their own terminology. So in here he mentions, Imam Ibn Kathir has mentioned inside his tafsir that وَالظَّاهِرْ الْمُتَبَادِرْ إِلَىٰ أَذْهَانِ الْمُشَبِّهِينَ مَنْفِيٌّ عَنِ اللَّهِ. Yes? That were you mentioning, Mawlana? That the apparent meaning, which quite intuitively comes to the mind of those who give tashbih, similarity with God, this is rejected or is denied from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this clearly demonstrates that when you read these words, yadun, sakun, the apparent meaning that comes to your mind, you do.
Don't use it.
But he comments in this. He says, no. He says what Imam Ibn Kathir is saying, yes, حَقٌّ كَذَلِكَ. It's true. فَإِنَّ هَؤُلَاء لَمْ يَعْكِلُوا مِن نُصُوصِ الصِّفَاتِ إِلَّا ظَاهِرٍ يَلِيقُ بِالْمَخْلُوقِ وَأَمَّا الظَّاهِرِ مُتَبَادٍ إِلَى أَذْهَانِ الْعُلَمَاءِ وَالْمُوَحِّدِينَ وَالْمُنَزِّهِينَ فَهَذَا لَا يَنْفِي. So this is interesting. He says, yeah, the apparent meaning that comes to your mind is denied. But this apparent meaning that is attributed towards a makhluk. There's an apparent meaning that comes to your mind towards regarding Allah. But what is the apparent meaning? He suggests that it comes to the muwahhideen. Yeah, those who have tawheed and those who tanzeed, they know that.
More of an intrinsic state.
It's a very interesting. And I'm thinking, okay, but what is that meaning?
Yeah.
I'm sure we are, alhamdulillah, we are all muwahhids. But that, so then it seems like it's a mystery now. What is the apparent meaning? You don't want to explain the qadr mushtarak. You're saying it's not this. So what is it? It comes to the minds of the muwahhideen. Can you please tell us that? That we don't get told that.
Then they go back to just saying the word again.
Back to word again. And this is where I think, obviously, I know some people were upset. Some of the, I would say, the ardent mutakallimun regarding the taqreez of Shaykh Mufti Taqi al-Uthmani.
Yeah.
In Al-Qawl al-Tamam, where he says that, well, Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi's differences are semantics.
Yes. So
some of the mutakallimun say, no, it's not semantic, it's actual differences. But I appreciate why Mufti Taqi al-Uthmani said that.
They don't go explicit with the lazim.
They don't, yeah. If they reject all the lawazim, it's a semantic difference.
Depending on which passage you read, some sound very tashbih, like others don't sound it. So you'll be like, which one is it? Because they understand the implications of it. But just to kind of wrap up, inshallah, because I think we've gone on for a few minutes ago as well. I just want to mention a few responses. I think that's the main thrust of the whole argument, inshallah, has been done, right? I think we've discussed that. But there's been some criticism against Shaykh Hatim, and I want to kind of touch upon them, whether they're justified, if they're not. The first was regarding the actual, what is called the takhrij and tahqiq of the statement of Imam Malik. So the passage of Imam Malik that he cites, there's been a response by Shaykh Sa'id al-Shaykh, but this is it's a summary. He's got a book coming out, so I can't really look at that as of yet. And I did go through some parts which are available of Shaykh Sa'id al-Shaykh's critique of Shaykh Hatim. I will say two things about it. Number one, even if the Shaykh is correct, that the weakening of the other types of reports by Imam Shaykh Hatim, which is Shaykh Hatim argues that the one that you read, which is not the most common, which is that Imam Malik is asked the verse of the Quran, Ar-Rahman al-Arsh istawa, كما وصف نفسه, as he describes himself. Imam Malik says, ولا يقال كيف وكيف عنه مرفوع. This passage, which is the most closest and apparent to Tafwid al-Ma'na, this is, he says, the most authentic. The objection is that no, this is authentic, it has base, but there's others that are authentic as well. If that's your contention, then it's like, okay, fair enough, right? But Shaykh Hatim's main argument is not resting upon this passage. It's saying that you can actually interpret and explain the other passages in light of that as well. Secondly, there were some discussions, which I think the Shaykh Sa'ad al-Shaykh does point out, which I found that does respond to some of the analysis of Shaykh Hatim. But I can't comment upon that just yet until the actual book comes out. And then I also believe Shaykh Hatim is responding to it in his new edition of this. So what I will do is, the reason I'm not going into that right now is not because I don't want to go into it, I'm more than happy to go into it, but it doesn't go into the thrust of what the main juggler of the because that narration is still considered to be authentic and not used much. So Shaykh Hatim actually does state that even if you say this narration is not authentic, that the other narration is authentic also, this still gives us weight of how to interpret that. So interpretively, it's still very important.
In a way that doesn't lead to absurdity.
Exactly. So even the other narration does suggest that it could be authentic. And there's some very specific isnad points. Maybe I can, saying it here wouldn't make much sense. So probably write up is more important when it comes to those kind of very specifics. The second thing which was mentioned as well is that the long list of authorities. So this idea of long list of authority, isn't that an argument by authority?
Yeah.
The argument is yes. An argument by authority is not redundant, depending on your audience. And one of the reasons why this is important is that a lot of people that are associated with Salafism, especially when you're in those kind of institutions, etc., you sometimes forget the fact that your view is a minority view. Forget Ash'ari is being dominant. The view of Tafwid has been the dominant view of Ahl Sunnah, whether you like it or not. All right, you can contend that Ash'aris are not dominant, whatever, you can say that, but this view has been dominant. So sometimes a list, even though it's not an academic argument, when I say academic, I mean that you have to prove the actual point, right?
Sorry to interject, so you can carry on. The list, regarding the list, is very important to highlight that Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullahi alayhi, he also concedes that there are Hanabila scholars, Hanbali scholars with the opinion of Tafwid. Yes. I think it's very important to highlight 100%. This. This confession from Imam Taymiyyah, rahmatullahi.
Yeah, 100%. No. So those lists are important because it does show you who's saying what. So if you're a student of knowledge as associated with Salafism, and then you come and you're saying, these guys, this view is batil and so on, at least know the implication of who you're talking about.
Yeah.
So there should be a level of humbleness in that. And I'll also add is that something not so discussed is there are ulama, right, before Ibn Taymiyyah, that did do ithbat, affirm sifat in a way that was seen as being liking Allah to the creation. So Ibn Taymiyyah is not the first to do that. Let's be clear here. So Ibn Taymiyyah is not the first to affirm attributes in a way that was deemed to be tashbih or tajseem. But where Ibn Taymiyyah is the first is the one to criticize tafwid al-ma'na. There's a distinction between the two. So what Shaykh Hatim argues, and so I'm already anticipating responses where people would say to Shaykh Hatim that, look, this guy, and there'll be examples of that, look, they clearly affirm the meaning. Shaykh Hatim is saying the first to critique tafwid al-ma'na, so these guys never critiqued tafwid al-ma'na. The first was Ibn Taymiyyah. Yeah. Were there people that did ghulu in ithbat? That's, by the way, affirmed by Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah as well. Ibn Taymiyyah himself says there are people that do ghulu in ithbat, meaning more than me, right? So that's a known reality. So anyway, so lists are important because it humbles a student to know that, all right, before I start taking fiery positions, be aware of who's taking what position. Yeah. So lists are important for that. Secondly, it's not just the list. Yes.
A question. So regarding this list, and while I was reading the few posts that I read, when he goes through the authorities, there are some scholars that he mentions, but he doesn't, he kind of mentions them, but then he also mentions that they had a specific opinion about this issue, not one of tafwid al-ma'na, but they had an opinion to say, no, we should do ta'wil, or they had a different opinion completely. So some of the scholars that are mentioned in the list, like 90 odd, they don't necessarily adhere to the opinion of tafwid.
90 is, no, they adhere to the fundamental position of tafwid.
Okay.
Right. So the fundamental interpretation is of tafwid. Whether how strong they want ta'wil is another question, but they adhere fundamentally to tafwid.
So the purpose of the list is not to say these are the scholars that adhere to tafwid al-ma'na al-batta, rather to say...
No, it's to say they all affirm that Imam Malik's statement is of tafwid al-ma'na.
Okay.
Right? Now, some of those statements, that's one thing, right? So it's not just a list. Now, Shaykh Saif al-Asri has lists and it's quite good, but what I think people miss when they look at Shaykh Hatim, whoever read the book, is that it's not just a list. Many of the scholars in there have detailed analysis, about the passages of those Imams. So like his discussion, Ibn Abdul Barr, his discussion, Imam Khattabi, his discussion, Imam Tirmidhi. I would advise, if you're into this discussion.
And Qurtubi, that's quite.
Qurtubi, sorry, those four, read those four at least, right? And you see, for example, like Khattabi and Ibn Abdul Barr are considered from the Imams before Ibn Taymiyyah. So if I can demonstrate, and I think that's something you can demonstrate very clearly, they do Tafwid al-Ma'na, right? Because they do nafi, explicit negation of all the lawazim of Ithbat al-Ma'na, meaning they left nothing with the meaning, from Ibn Abdul Barr, Khattabi, who are two of the Imams that everyone agrees upon. That discussion is, I think, probably one of the most important for those who want to look at authorities before Ibn Taymiyyah. So I think many would agree that Ibn Abdul Barr and Khattabi are, if not greater authorities in Ibn Taymiyyah, both in terms of their authority in this field of hadith, as well as being earlier, closer to the Imams as-Salaf. So that's those kind of passages are not just a quotation and just move on, quotation and move on. There's actually proper tahqiq being done on there. And the last thing I would say here is that the tone. So one of the things that Shaykh Hatim is criticized on is his tone. Now, of course, there must be specifics, I'm sure some people may take contingents of, right? But as a whole, I'm saying the tone that Shaykh Hatim does sometimes come across as being quite harsh. And I would say two things in response to this as well, inshallah. And Mawlana can come in this point as well, right? One point I would say is that, again, you have to understand the context. So if someone comes from the outside or has been amongst more mellow Salafis and stuff, more like more of our relationship with Salafis, much more of a nicer relationship, right? Then that tone kind of seems a bit odd. But if you look at mainstream Saudi Salafi discussion about Sifat, it's not been nice, right? And it's been very critical, it's been very dismissive. So sometimes there's that arrogance, which is not deliberately arrogant, but it's arrogance. So if you say, Akhta ibn Hajar, as if it's a nobody. Ibn Hajar, this wasn't his field, as if it's your field. You heard those ones, right? This was Aqidah wasn't Nawawi's field.
Okay.
It's my field, right? So that lack of humbleness is there. So that Shaykh Hatim has like this kind of harshness towards those kind of folks. And secondly, what I would say is that even if the harshness and tone could sometimes be seen as be excessive, especially if my temperament, I'm not a person that likes to be super harsh. But what I would say, and this is a point that I've mentioned Mohammad before as well, is that some people, they can get away with it. Why? Because of the contribution they make to a field.
The stature of their knowledge, yeah.
The stature of the individual allows it. So I've given examples before, like Imam Bukhari. Imam Bukhari in his Juz' Rafi' Yadayn has very, very harsh remarks about Imam Hanifa. But we don't dismiss Imam Bukhari outright because of his Sahih. But if Imam Bukhari didn't have a Sahih, didn't have any works, wasn't a great hadith scholar, and all we had was him criticizing Imam Hanifa, we would say, who is this guy? Right? Why are you so harsh for? And we'll put you, so likewise, there's a distinction between, and that's, I'm talking about the Ash'ari as well, right? If you're a young up-and-coming Ash'ari scholar, right, and you're in your early 20s and want to make Rudud on Ibn Taymiyyah, make videos and be harsh against other people, right? I will say to you that, so that wasn't to get you as I was speaking.
I was thinking, this is a podcast reputation of me.
I started hearing the intro of that channel.
As I was speaking,
no, it's okay, don't worry. I forgive you.
But it's true. The idea is that, look, you haven't earned the right to have that harshness.
I know I haven't.
Right? Maybe you haven't. But if you've like a serious contributor to the field, even if it's excessive, like amongst Deobandi circles, everyone probably knows about Shaykh Yunus rahmatullahi alayhi, right? And Shaykh Yunus would say sometimes very harsh things. But then the reason why everyone was like okay with that was because he's been teaching hadith for 40 years, right? We're talking about this, immense scholar. But I can't now come and say, well, Shaykh Yunus said this remark, so I'm going to have a go at Gujis as well. He said a lot of Guji remarks. I'm going to have a go at Gujis as well. Like, you're being racist, right? But Shaykh Yunus did it. Yeah, but that's Shaykh Yunus, and who are you?
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
So there has to be that kind of humbleness. And so when it comes to these kind of figures, even if I think that they are a bit harsh in tone, because of the contribution, I think you can let that go, and I think it's fine. But the main point is that all it is? No. There's true scholarship there, which is, maybe have certain remarks that people find a bit offensive or find a bit over the top. But if it was like the bulk of the book is just sab and shatam, just attack, and no actual content, then fair enough, but that's not justified. So I do think that the main points of critique of the book, save the discussion of isnad. I'm still suspending that judgment on what's going to come out, even though I don't think it will change the book, the main discussion, but I'll be happy to hear some of the critiques and read about it. The book is going to come out soon, and I'll be happy to review it again and go through it. But other than that, I don't think the rest of just the critiques against the book are justified. And those figures that I've seen some of them speak about it, like Dr. Shaykh Ahmed Gharib, who's spoken about this work and himself's got a book, I think their actual approach to the topic of sifat regarding ithbat al-ma'na has actually far more problems and holes. He's got things to defend rather than what's in the thrust of this book, inshallah. That's how I was going to end with that.
Yeah, so I agree with Mawlana because I struggled with this personally myself, because Shaykh Hatim, he does start off, page 6. He suggests that, the enemies of Islam have this role in our internal fighting. So I thought, this is all about unity. And then he moves on to page 7, that the objective is to bring ittifaq and ittihad with the ummah. But then he goes in quite hard in several places. So as Mawlana said, somebody like Shaykh Hatim who has contributions, he can do that. And also I think the demographics or the geographical location where he's Saudi, he must have had a lot of pushback.
He has a lot. I get into that, but
he has a lot of pushback. So I can understand.
More freedom, but
from when somebody is after you and when you respond, you're naturally going to be. But I know this is maybe unrealistic expectation. I think if he still kept his maybe tone, it would be more effective to those who are his opponents. Maybe Allahu A'lam.
Normally with time, what happens is people look past, like Izbul Salam, for example.
Yeah.
Because we've heard of his name so much, that sounds like we laugh at it. Not laughing dismissively, we laugh at, look how harsh this guy is, right? Because we know how human he is. The human, we know the human, Because what you can do is you can take that person that, okay, if you take away some of that harshness, but you're left with so much. The thing is, if you take away harsh and you're left with nothing, then it's like, there's nothing to work.
But to be fair, so like in certain places he says, when these guys, they don't have the salafs, they're going to make up salafs for themselves. And there's some amusing comments. But regarding Imam Taymiyyah, rahmatullahi alayhi himself, he does say, and Mawlana, you'll probably remember this, he does say that, for example, regarding Imam Qurtubi, he demonstrates that he misquoted Imam Qurtubi deliberately. He was aware of the text, but he deliberately omitted certain passages in order to
prove his point.
But then he also says that this was a sincere scholar, and he did this because he believed this to be the truth. So you just mentioned this in a few places where he said, look, Imam Taymiyyah, he deliberately omitted this text, but he didn't do it because of khiyana toward Islam, waliyadu billah. He was the Imam of the Ummah. He did this because every person, when they believe something to be the truth, they will defend it however they do. So he does have that side to him, but there's also the other side.
But it's the nature of when you're being critical, even today, I'm sure people will probably hear us saying, you're a bit dismissive of this, you're a bit harsh on this. And I think that's the nature of the discussion you're going into. So I think sometimes people have this unrealistic high expectation of how it should be done. And so that's part of the personality of the individual as well. So again, as long as it's not personal, it's not like trying to, it's not fuhash, right? Some like illicit speech, etc. And it kind of is kind of around it. And by the way, it's not everywhere in the book.
It's
just certain parts that people kind of pointed out, and they said, "Well,
those parts are quite."
They point out like, how do you do? But then, but that's the sheikh. The sheikh is like that. He is very passionate. He gets very thing about that. But then, when you weigh that up in terms of his contribution, it's minuscule in comparison.
Mawlana, I don't think we have much time, but I just want to say that there's many objections regarding Tafwid. But I think if everybody, they could just read these books themselves.
Yeah, that's what we always do.
Just read the books yourself. Regarding the third edition of Tafwid of Shaykh Saif al-Asr, he addresses Sheikh Mohammed bin Mahmoud's book. So in the third edition, he answers some of the objections in the beginning, but he does say that this would require a complete book.
Yeah.
So I contacted him a few days ago. He said he will get back to me, but he hasn't got back to me yet. I just wanted to know when will that book be published, because he just mentioned that it will be published soon. There's one final point I want to mention regarding this book of Sheikh Mohammed. So just to be fair to the Salafi audiences, I've read this book, and I would say it is a very thorough endeavor to answer all of the objections from the Ash'ari. But there's two main problems I have with this book. Number one is the accusation of the Ash'ari that they are doing ta'atil. They say that these sifat are meaningless. Even though he explains what tafwid is, and from the linguistic meaning, as we mentioned in the beginning, tafwid doesn't mean you are rendering meaningless. You are just consigning the meaning whilst accepting it has a meaning, but we do not definitively. So he does mention that this is what tafwid means, but then throughout his book, he says ta'til, that the Ash'ari says it has no meaning. It has no meaning. So that was one big problem I had, because that is the foundation of the entire discourse. And he does that with some other issues, like Ash'ari only believe to be 7 attributes, and they don't believe in na'udhu billah, la yu'awwal, as la yu'awwilun or something like this, where they don't give attention, na'udhu billah, to the Quran and Sunnah, only to the reason and stuff like this. But that's the first problem. The second problem which I have with this book is that throughout the book, he rejects the lawazim of those sifat. So it's not a body limb, it's not this, it's not that. You think, okay, I appreciate that, alhamdulillah. So there's not much difference between Ash'ari and Atharis in that sense. And then he also has a section of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim, where he said, look, Ibn Qayyim never believed in tajseem, jism, etc. So he rejects all the lawazim. But then this is where I have the problem. For me, it's like a
give and take.
I'm struggling, yes? I'm trying to struggle to reconcile. Okay, you've rejected all the lawazim, but then you're quoting scholars as an authority. So in that list, he has one scholar, you're going to mention, yeah? This Dashti's book. Yeah? Dashti book. Just look at the title of this book. I'm not going to even comment on this book. Okay, there's many things to say about this book. He also considers Imam Tahawi to be deviant. He quotes this book as an authority. إثبات الحد لله تعالى, to affirm a had for Allah, وبأنه قاعد وجالس على عرشه, and that he subhanahu wa ta'ala والعياذ بالله is seated and sitting on his throne. Yeah. So look, that is the title of the book. So this is where my reconciliation is, that throughout the book you've rejected the lawazim of jism, of a body, but then you're quoting scholars, books, not the scholar, he was quoting this book. Now, if I say to you, somebody is sitting and seated, I mean, how can you then say, well, you don't believe in a body? Like, how?
And just,
you see,
just
this
to
is
show, when we talk about in the beginning about academic honesty, right?
Yeah.
That book, Shaykh Al-Albani says that's a ghulu.
Did you say that? Okay.
Yeah, so he actually said extremism, and he refutes that notion, right? In that book. So just to show the idea that amongst modern Salafi discourse, it's not unanimity on all these points.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a spectrum of people that are, and that's why in my personal opinion, the more you try to dig deeper, the more problems it causes for them. But Shaykh Albani himself says there's a ghulu in this book. Right?
And I also believe, I haven't spoken to the author, I also believe that he has problems with the book. Why? Because when he quotes the book, especially the first time on page 397, he only mentions Ithbatul Hadillahi Ta'ala. He doesn't mention the second half of the title, that he's Jalis and Qa'id ala arshihi. So, I mean, Allahu Alam, because the rest, somebody could argue he's only using the short version, yeah? But usually in referencing, first time you give the full reference, and number two, throughout the book, the other books, titles, which are much longer than this, he constantly quotes the full thing. But down here, he doesn't. So I'm obviously Husn al-Dhan here, that the author himself thinking that way, this book is problematic, and therefore I'm not going to mention the second half of the title. But the argument still is that, look, if you are rejecting all lawazim, why are you quoting such a book? Allahu ta'ala alam.
As you saw the notes of the reviews, you can't do everything.
You can't do everything. There's so much there.
At the end, I'll say, read it. Take your time out. Read these works, inshallah. And if there are questions at the end that people have that you think we've not touched upon regarding this topic, I'm sure we can get Mohammad Yasir again, and we can maybe do a part 2. He's on it, something maybe, right? Otherwise, our next episode is going to be regarding understanding Salafism by Yasir Qadi, inshallah. That's what we'll be reviewing next. I don't know if you want to be here for that. You're going to be a regular guest, it's up to you.
Inshallah. Are you next week, yeah?
No.
Okay.
We'll pause him, right?
Inshallah. Yes. If you have enjoyed this episode, then please like, share, and subscribe. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. All the material that you've seen today, all of the references that have been made will be posted up on the Telegram channel. So please do join that Telegram channel and share it to whoever is following the podcast. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.